What if the greatest mystery of the cosmos isn't a question to be solved, but a lullaby to be felt? What if the profound, echoing silence of the universe, the fact that we see no signs of other life despite its staggering vastness, is not a cause for fear, but the very thing that can cradle you into a deep and wondrous sleep? Tonight, we won't be searching for answers. Instead, we will float through the most compelling theories for the silence, letting them unravel in your mind, not as puzzles, but as bedtime stories for the soul. So, close your eyes and let the great cosmic quiet settle around you. The universe is waiting to whisper its secrets. The Fermi Paradox. Picture a summer day in Los Alamos, 1950, when the air was warm and thoughts turned to matters both mundane and cosmic. A group of brilliant minds walked together to lunch, engaged in the kind of casual conversation that sometimes births the most profound questions. Among them was Enrico Fermi, a physicist whose name would become synonymous with a paradox so elegant, so troubling, so perfectly simple that it would echo through decades of speculation and wonder. They spoke of many things that day, of flying saucers perhaps, of the curious human tendency to see patterns in clouds and meaning in mystery. And then, in the middle of lunch, in the midst of ordinary afternoon light, Fermi asked a question that seemed to fall from nowhere and everywhere at once. Where is everybody? 3 words, simple syllables that opened a chasm of contemplation. Because the mathematics suggested a universe teeming with life, probability calculations that made Earth's isolation seem impossibly unlikely, and yet the evidence presented only silence, only absence, only the lonely light of stars that appeared to shine on empty worlds and vacant systems, stretching in every direction as far as telescopes could see. Let yourself feel the weight of that silence now, but gently, without alarm. Imagine floating in the darkness between stars, turning slowly, looking in all directions for the signs of others. Lights that pulse with intention rather than physics. Signals that carry meaning rather than mere radiation. The technological fingerprints of civilizations that have learned to harness their suns, to reshape their worlds, to reach across the light years with messages or presence, or at least the unmistakable evidence of existence. But the universe offers only quiet, only the background hum of creation itself, the cosmic microwave radiation that echoes the universe's birth, natural and unintentional. Only the regular cycles of stars igniting and dying, galaxies wheeling in their ancient dances, nebulae glowing with the raw materials of worlds not yet born. All natural, all explainable by physics alone, without need for biology, without evidence of consciousness, without any trace of the others who, by mathematics at least, should be there. The Fermi paradox is not really a paradox in the classical sense. It is more an observation, a cognitive dissonance, a gap between expectation and experience that our minds struggle to bridge. On one side of this gap sits the incomprehensible vastness of the universe. Billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars. Many of those stars accompanied by planets, and some portion of those planets sitting in zones where water might flow, where chemistry might complexify, where life might, however improbably, begin. The numbers are staggering. The possibilities multiply into figures that overwhelm comprehension. Even if the chance of life arising on any given suitable planet is vanishingly small, multiplication by billions of billions produces an expectation of abundance. The universe should be, if not crowded, at least populated. The cosmic neighborhood should show signs of habitation. The silence should be broken by someone, somewhere, somehow. And yet, on the other side of this gap, sits the observation that has remained stubbornly consistent through decades of searching. We detect nothing. The radio telescopes listen to frequencies that any technological civilization would likely use, scanning the heavens for patterns that physics alone wouldn't produce. The optical telescopes watch for anomalies, for megastructures that might dim distant stars in ways that planets couldn't, for laser pulses that might carry greetings across the void. The spectrum analyzers examine the light filtering through exoplanet atmospheres, looking for chemical combinations that might betray the presence of industrial activity or biological abundance. Nothing. Or at least, nothing yet that has survived scrutiny. Nothing that couldn't be explained by natural processes. Nothing that announces with certainty the presence of others who also wonder if they are alone. This silence is the paradox. This absence is the mystery. Not the question of whether life exists elsewhere, but the question of why. If it does exist, if it has existed for the billions of years that preceded our arrival, if it has had time to evolve and advance and reach across the stars, we see no trace of it, hear no whisper of it, find no evidence of it anywhere in all the vast expanse we can observe. Breathe deeply now, and let this mystery settle over you like a blanket woven from starlight and questions. There is comfort in this paradox if you let yourself find it. The silence means we are still searching, still discovering, still at the beginning of understanding, rather than drowning in answers that would diminish wonder. The absence leaves room for imagination, for possibility, for the dreams that help us drift towards sleep beneath skies that might, tomorrow or in 1,000 tomorrows, finally reflect back the light of other fires, other minds, other dreamers looking up at their heavens and asking the same gentle question. Some have suggested that the Fermi paradox isn't really a paradox at all, but merely reflects our impatience and our incomplete understanding. We have been listening, in cosmic terms, for the briefest moment. Our radio telescopes have scanned only the tiniest fraction of the sky, at only certain frequencies, for only a handful of decades. We are like someone who dips a cup into the ocean, finds no whales in that single cup, and concludes the ocean must be empty of whales entirely. The universe is older than we can properly imagine, wider than we can fully grasp, stranger than we permit ourselves to believe. Perhaps the others are there, but we are looking in the wrong places, listening at the wrong times, expecting the wrong signs. Perhaps they communicate in ways we haven't imagined, using technologies we haven't dreamed of, operating on timescales that make our civilization's entire existence less than a heartbeat in the life of something ancient and patient. Or perhaps the silence itself is a kind of answer, though what question it answers remains unclear. Perhaps it speaks to the rarity of what happened here, on this particular world, orbiting an unremarkable star in the outer reaches of an average galaxy. Perhaps it whispers about filters and barriers, about steps in the journey from simple chemistry to spacefaring civilization that are so difficult, so improbable, that most worlds never complete them all. Perhaps the path from single cells to starships is littered with obstacles that stop most travelers, and we are among the rare few, the improbably lucky ones, who have threaded all the needles so far. But these are thoughts for another section of our journey. For now, simply rest in the paradox itself, in the tension between expectation and observation, between the mathematical suggestion of company and the experiential reality of solitude. Let this tension cradle you rather than concern you. It is not a problem requiring your immediate solution. It is a lullaby sung in the language of cosmic scales and evolutionary timelines, a reminder that the biggest questions don't demand quick answers, that some mysteries are meant to be lived with rather than solved, wondered about rather than resolved. Fermi's question hangs in the air like a constellation. 3 words that form a pattern humans will contemplate for generations yet to come. Where is everybody? The question is patient. The universe is patient. And you, drifting now deeper into the soft borders of sleep, can afford to be patient too, releasing the need to know, surrendering to the comfort of mystery, letting the paradox become a friend rather than a puzzle, a companion for this journey through theories that whisper rather than shout, that suggest rather than demand, that invite you to dream rather than insist you wake and worry. The stars shine on, indifferent and beautiful, each one a possible sun for possible worlds where possible minds might ask possible questions that mirror our own. Or perhaps not. Perhaps we are alone, magnificently and terrifyingly and wondrously alone. The universe's way of becoming conscious of itself in this one unlikely place. through these improbable beings who have learned to wonder about their wondering, to question their questioning, to dream about the dreams of others who may or may not dream at all. Either answer, aloneness, or company is cause for awe. Either possibility invites wonder rather than fear. And so the Fermi paradox becomes not a source of anxiety, but a meditation on existence itself, a koan without resolution, a question that teaches us something about ourselves merely in the asking, regardless of whatever answer might someday arrive or never arrive at all. Let the paradox fade now into the background of your awareness, becoming part of the gentle static of consciousness, descending into sleep. The silence of the stars is not empty, but full of possibility, pregnant with potential, rich with the promise of discoveries yet unmade and questions yet unasked. Rest in that fullness, float in that promise, and let yourself drift now toward the next whisper in our cosmic journey, toward the equation that quantifies wonder, toward the mathematics of maybe, toward the numbers that dance between 0 and infinity, never settling, always suggesting, forever calculating the beautiful uncertainty of existence beyond our small blue world. The universe holds you, the darkness carries you, and somewhere in the space between this breath and the next, between this thought and the dream to follow, you are exactly where the cosmos has been preparing for you to be since the first stars ignited in the ancient dark. The Drake equation, in the soft space between waking and sleep, where logic loosens its grip and imagination flows more freely, there exists a special kind of mathematics, a gentle arithmetic that counts not what is known, but what might be. This is the realm of the Drake equation, named for Frank Drake, the astronomer who in 1961 attempted to bring order to speculation, to transform wondering into calculation, to take the overwhelming question of cosmic loneliness and break it into pieces small enough for human minds to hold. Picture Drake, standing before a blackboard in the calm of the evening, chalk in hand, looking at the overwhelming problem of whether we are alone. He cannot count what exists beyond our sight. He cannot survey civilizations he cannot detect, but he can, with patience and care, identify the steps that must occur for a technological civilization to arise, and he can assign each step a probability, a fraction, a number that represents the likelihood of that particular bridge being crossed on the journey from empty space to conscious thought, to radio signals spreading across the galaxy. The equation is beautiful in its structure, elegant in its simplicity, profound in what it attempts. Let it wash over you now like a lullaby composed of variables and multiplication, each term a soft note in a song about possibility. You need not memorize it, need not calculate with it, only feel its rhythm, understand its poetry, let it carry you deeper into the restful contemplation of what might be. We begin with the rate at which stars form in our galaxy, a number measured in new suns per year, the cosmic birth rate of those furnaces that make everything else possible. Stars are the parents of planets, the forges of heavy elements, the long-burning candles around which life might gather. In the Milky Way, several new stars ignite each year, adding to the hundreds of billions already burning, already hosting their own systems, already creating the conditions where chemistry might one day become biology. From this foundation, we multiply by the fraction of those stars that have planets. And here, modern astronomy has given us a gift of certainty where Drake had only hope. We now know that planets are common, abundant, perhaps nearly universal. Most stars have worlds, and many have multiple worlds, systems of spheres and ellipses, rocks and gases, orbiting their suns in arrangements both familiar and strange. This fraction is high, close to 1, a multiplication that barely reduces the total, a step that most stars successfully complete. Next comes the fraction of those planets that might actually support life, the worlds that fall into that precious zone where water can exist as liquid, where temperature allows chemistry to complexify, rather than freeze into simplicity or boil into chaos. We call this the habitable zone, the Goldilocks region, not too hot and not too cold, but somewhere in that narrow band where life as we understand it might find purchase and begin its long, unlikely climb toward complexity. This fraction is smaller but still substantial. Each star's habitable zone is determined by its brightness, its size, its stability. Cooler stars have narrower zones, closer to their surfaces. Hotter stars have wider zones, but they also live shorter lives, perhaps too brief for evolution to complete its slow work. But calculation suggests that many stars, perhaps 1 in 5, perhaps more, have at least one planet orbiting in that sweet spot where oceans might form and persist, where atmospheres might hold the right gases in the right proportions, where the stage is set for the drama of life to potentially unfold. And then the equation asks its first truly speculative question. On what fraction of these suitable worlds does life actually arise? Here we have only one example, only Earth, only our own history of organic chemistry, discovering how to copy itself, how to mutate, how to evolve, how to transform from simple self-replicating molecules into the magnificent diversity of biology we observe today. Is life common, erupting easily wherever conditions allow? Or is it vanishingly rare, a miracle so improbable that Earth might be the only place in the observable universe where it occurred? We don't know. The variable floats between near zero and near one, and every scientist who considers it brings their own intuition, their own philosophy, their own hope or caution to the estimation. Some see the speed with which life appeared on Earth once conditions allowed and conclude it must be easy, inevitable, a natural consequence of chemistry given liquid water and energy and time. Others see the complexity required, the precise conditions demanded, the countless things that must align, and suspect we are profoundly lucky, improbably blessed, perhaps alone in all the vast expanse. But the equation continues, undeterred by uncertainty, multiplying forward through the next gates that must be passed. What fraction of worlds where life begins goes on to develop intelligence? Again, we have only one data point, only our own lineage, only the story of nervous systems becoming more complex, brains becoming larger, cognitive abilities expanding until finally, improbably, one species developed not just intelligence, but consciousness, that knows itself, that ponders its own existence, that asks questions about the universe and its place within it. Was this inevitable? Given enough time and evolutionary pressure, will life always discover intelligence, always trend toward greater cognitive complexity? Or is it a fluke, an accident, a quirk of particular circumstances on one particular world? Some argue that intelligence is adaptive, useful, beneficial to survival and reproduction, and therefore evolution will stumble upon it repeatedly, independently, inevitably. Others point out that most species that have ever lived on Earth did not develop human-like intelligence, that it is not necessary for survival, that evolution has no direction or goal, and our emergence might be as improbable as any other specific outcome of millions of years of random mutation and natural selection. The uncertainty compounds. The variable waits for an answer we cannot yet provide. And the equation multiplies onward, asking next, what fraction of intelligent species develop technology? Specifically, the kind of technology that might allow communication across the stars. Radio broadcasts, laser pulses, megastructures visible from distant systems, something, anything, that would announce their presence to others, searching as we search, listening as we listen, hoping as we hope. Intelligence does not automatically produce technology. Dolphins are intelligent, with complex communication and social structures, yet they have not built radio telescopes or spacecraft. Octopuses solve problems with remarkable cognition, yet they have not transmitted signals toward Alpha Centauri. Technology requires not just intelligence, but specific forms of intelligence, particular evolutionary pressures, certain environmental conditions that allow for tool use, for fire, for metallurgy, for the accumulation of knowledge across generations, for the development of science and engineering and the industrial capacity to build instruments that can speak to the stars. Perhaps this step is easy, a natural consequence of intelligence meeting challenges and developing solutions. Or perhaps it is extraordinarily difficult, requiring a precise combination of cognitive abilities, social structures, and environmental factors that rarely align. We do not know. We multiply by another fraction floating in uncertainty, and then the equation asks its final question, perhaps its saddest question, the one that speaks not to beginnings, but to endings. How long does a technological civilization last? How many years, on average, does a species that has learned to split atoms and launch satellites continue to exist, continue to broadcast, continue to send signals into the cosmos, announcing its presence and hoping for reply? This variable is the most uncertain of all, because it asks us to predict not just the past that produced us, but the future that awaits us. Do civilizations destroy themselves, succumb to their own power, fall victim to weapons or environmental collapse or resource depletion or some other catastrophe their technology enables? Or do they mature, survive their adolescence, emerge into longevity measured in millions or billions of years, stable and enduring, patient transmitters who fill the galaxy with their presence? If only we listen long enough, look carefully enough, wait patiently enough. When Drake first proposed his equation in 1961, humanity had just barely entered the space age, and the spectre of nuclear annihilation loomed large over every consideration of the future. The variable reflecting civilization longevity carried special weight, special worry, special urgency. If we destroy ourselves within centuries of developing radio, and if that is typical of technological species, then the equation produces a small number. Perhaps zero, perhaps nearly zero. Galaxies full of ruins and silence. Brief sparkles of consciousness that flare and fade before ever finding each other in the dark. But if civilizations learn to survive their dangerous technologies, if most who reach this stage continue for eons, then the equation produces large numbers, predictions of thousands or millions of contemporaneous civilizations in the Milky Way alone. Galaxies humming with conversation and light, cosmic communities waiting to welcome newcomers who have survived long enough to join. The equation does not tell us which is true. It only structures the question, organizes the uncertainty, transforms vague wondering into specific variables that can be discussed, debated, refined as knowledge advances. And in this way, the Drake equation becomes not a tool for producing answers, but a framework for thinking clearly about mystery, a way to hold uncertainty without being paralyzed by it, a meditation on what we know and don't know and might someday discover. Let these variables float through your relaxing mind now like equations dissolving into dreams, numbers softening into suggestions, mathematics becoming poetry about possibility. The Drake equation is not about the answer, because the answer depends on values we cannot yet measure, on questions we are only beginning to know how to ask. It is about the structure of wonder, the anatomy of mystery, the way human minds take the overwhelming and make it manageable, take the infinite and make it calculable, take the ineffable and give it symbols and numbers and relationships that our consciousness can hold. As you drift deeper now towards sleep, imagine each variable in the equation as a gate on a long path, each one requiring passage, each one filtering the vast initial number of stars down through successive fractions, successive probabilities, successive uncertainties, until at the end, we arrive at an estimate, however uncertain, however sensitive to our assumptions, of how many civilizations might exist in the galaxy now, in this moment, while we sleep and wake and wonder about them. The number might be zero. We might be alone, the sole instance, the only place where all the variables aligned favorably, where every gate was passed, where every improbable step was completed. If so, we are precious beyond measure, the universe's only way of knowing itself. The cosmos made conscious in this one unlikely place, this one brief moment of cosmic history. Or the number might be vast. There might be millions of civilizations, some younger than ours, some older, some barely clinging to existence, others having matured beyond our comprehension, transformed into forms we wouldn't recognize as civilizations at all, as alive at all, as minds at all. They might fill the galaxy with their presence, invisible only because we lack the wisdom to see, the patience to wait, The humility to recognize consciousness informs that evolution shaped on worlds so different from our own that similarity would be more surprising than strangeness. The equation cannot tell us which is true, but it gives us a way to think about it, to structure our uncertainty, to approach the question with both rigor and humility. And in its variables, in its structure, in its multiplication of fraction after fraction after fraction, it tells us something about the journey life must take to become consciousness, and consciousness must take to become civilizations that might meet in the spaces between stars. Rest now in the comfort of structured uncertainty, in the beauty of questions organized into mathematics, in the poetry of variables waiting for values we cannot yet provide. The Drake equation watches over your sleep like a constellation, like a pattern imposed on chaos, like human minds doing what they do best, finding structure in mystery, creating frameworks for wonder, building equations that help us think about the unthinkable, calculate the incalculable, number the innumerable possibilities that bloom in the space between certainty and ignorance, between our small knowledge and the vast unknown that surrounds it, like darkness around a candle, like silence around a song, like the cosmic void around our small, improbable, precious world. The variables multiply quietly in the background of consciousness. The fractions filter through your relaxing thoughts, and the answer, whatever it might be, waits patiently for morning or for centuries or for millennia, as patient as the universe itself, as certain to arrive eventually as stars are certain to burn, and planets certain to orbit, and time certain to carry all questions toward their eventual answers, or toward the peaceful dissolution of the questioning itself. The dark forest theory. In the deepening quiet of your relaxation, as consciousness descends through layers of wakefulness toward the soft realm of dreams, let us consider a theory that frames the cosmic silence not as absence, but as strategy, not as loneliness, but as caution, not as the emptiness of an uninhabited universe, but as the profound quiet of a dark forest where survival depends on stillness. The dark forest theory comes to us through science fiction, through the Chinese author Liu Cixin, whose trilogy of novels explored ideas that scientists and philosophers had considered in various forms, but had never quite articulated with such haunting clarity. It is a theory that transforms our perspective on the Fermi paradox, suggesting that the silence we observe is not because no one is there, but because everyone who is there has learned, through bitter experience or ancient wisdom, to remain very, very quiet. Imagine a vast forest at night, so large that its boundaries extend beyond sight, beyond knowing, perhaps beyond ending. You stand among the trees, and around you, you sense the presence of others, unseen in the darkness, moving quietly between the trunks and shadows, breathing carefully, listening intently, waiting. You cannot see them. They cannot see you. And in this darkness, this uncertainty, this profound lack of information about the intentions and capabilities of others, what is the safest strategy? What ensures survival when every sound might be heard, every light might be seen, every broadcast might reveal your location to beings whose nature and intentions you cannot assess? The theory suggests silence, invisibility, the discipline of stillness. Because in a universe governed by harsh mathematics of survival and competition, where resources are ultimately finite and meeting others means risking everything, the safest course is to reveal nothing, to watch without being seen, to listen without transmitting, to learn about others while ensuring they learn nothing about you. This is not a comforting theory. It does not warm the heart or encourage hope. But let it wash over you now without fear, because it is only a possibility, only one answer among many to the question of silence. And even if true, even if the cosmos operates by these dark forest rules, you are safe here, in this moment, in the soft space between stars and sleep, held by the peaceful darkness that asks nothing of you, threatens nothing, simply holds you gently as you drift. The logic of the dark forest proceeds through uncomfortable steps. First, survival is the primary need of civilizations, just as it is for individuals and species. Everything else, curiosity, compassion, culture builds upon the foundation of continued existence. A dead civilization can pursue no other goals, realize no other values, contribute nothing further to the universe or to itself. Survival comes first. Second, the universe, while vast, is not infinite, and resources, while abundant, are not unlimited. Stars eventually burn out. Planets are finite in number. Even if scarcity is not an immediate concern, the mathematics of expansion, of populations growing, of civilizations spreading, suggests that eventually, inevitably, spheres of influence will intersect, and the question of resource competition will transition from theoretical to actual. Third, and most crucially, communication across cosmic distances creates fundamental uncertainty that cannot be resolved. When you broadcast your existence, when you announce your location, when you reveal yourself to the universe, you cannot know who or what will receive that signal. You cannot assess their intentions, cannot evaluate their capabilities, cannot determine whether they view you as potential partners or potential threats or potential prey. Light and radio waves travel at finite speed. Messages take years or centuries to cross between stars. By the time you receive a reply, the civilization that sent it might be completely different from what it was when it transmitted. And more troubling still, by the time you could recognize a threat and respond, it might be far too late. An aggressive civilization could launch relativistic weapons while still pretending friendship, missiles traveling at near light speed, arriving only slightly after the messages that promised peaceful intentions. The Dark Forest argues that this fundamental uncertainty, this inability to truly know the nature and intentions of others, combined with the ultimate priority of survival and the eventual reality of competition, creates a grim equilibrium where the rational strategy is preemptive strike or total silence. Since revealing yourself risks destruction, and since hiding offers safety, the galaxy fills not with conversation, but with observers, watchers, civilizations that scan the cosmos for signs of others while carefully omitting nothing themselves, nothing that would pinpoint their location, nothing that would make them targets. And should any civilization be foolish enough to broadcast, to announce itself, to shine a light in the dark forest declaring, "Here we are," then others, following the cold logic of survival, might feel compelled to extinguish that light, to eliminate the potential threat before it can become an actual danger, to strike at coordinates revealed by careless transmission, before the revealing civilization can develop into something more capable, more dangerous, more threatening. In this theory, the Fermi paradox resolves into understanding. The silence is not absence, but caution. The empty sky is not uninhabited, but carefully anonymous. The lack of contact reflects not the rarity of civilization, but the brutal wisdom that advanced civilizations learn. A wisdom purchased perhaps through the extinction of those who learned too late or never learned at all. In the dark forest of the cosmos, the first rule is silence. Breathe deeply now, and let the theory settle without disturbing your peace. Because the dark forest, if it describes reality at all, is far away from this moment, far from this soft night, far from the gentle space where you float between waking and dreams. And even the theory itself contains assumptions that might not hold, gaps in logic that could dissolve its grim conclusions, alternative possibilities that could transform its darkness into something less absolute. Perhaps civilizations advanced enough to pose threats to each other are also advanced enough to recognize the futility of conflict, the waste of destruction, the superior returns on cooperation over competition. Perhaps the dark forest is only a phase, a dangerous adolescence that most civilizations survive and surpass, emerging into maturity that sees others not as threats, but as the precious rarity they truly are. Consciousness, recognizing consciousness, minds meeting minds across the vast loneliness of existence. Perhaps the universe is large enough, resources abundant enough, that competition never becomes necessary. Perhaps advanced civilizations transition to forms of existence that don't compete with each other, that occupy different niches in reality, that pursue goals incomprehensible to us, and thus create no conflict with species like ours who remain bound to planets and physical form. Perhaps the dark forest logic only applies to civilizations of similar age and capability, creating a kind of Mexican standoff among rough equals, but allowing more advanced civilizations to reveal themselves without fear, because their superiority makes them unthreatened by younger species, their technology too advanced to be challenged by those still learning to leave their worlds. Or perhaps, most hopefully, the dark forest is simply wrong, built on assumptions about inevitability of conflict and scarcity that don't match the reality of a universe so vast that expansion never needs to involve conquest, where resources are effectively unlimited for any civilization patient, enough to collect them from the countless lifeless systems that vastly outnumber the rare worlds where life emerged and intelligence evolved. The theory cannot be proven from silence, cannot be confirmed by absence. Like many answers to the Fermi paradox, it is unfalsifiable by the very observations it seeks to explain. The dark forest makes predictions that match what we see. Nothing. But so do many other theories, and matching observations does not make a theory true, only possible, only worthy of consideration among the other possibilities that also fit the evidence we've gathered so far. Let the dark forest fade now from the foreground of your thoughts, receding like shadows that seemed menacing until morning revealed them as merely branches and clouds, forms without threat, shapes without malice. Even if the theory captures some truth about cosmic sociology, even if silence is indeed strategy and absence actually caution, it does not change the beauty of stars, or the wonder of existence, or the preciousness of consciousness wherever it occurs. However rare it might be, however carefully it might choose to hide itself from the potentially hostile gaze of others, who also hide, also watch, also wait in the darkness between worlds. You are safe here, in this moment, on this world that has broadcast its presence carelessly, joyfully, filling space with radio and television and radar since the mid-20th century, announcing ourselves without fully considering whether the universe might hear and how it might respond. If the dark forest is real, then we have already violated its rules, already made ourselves visible, already called into the cosmic woods declaring our presence and position. And yet we remain, undisturbed, unthreatened by relativistic weapons or aggressive aliens, still here beneath stars that watch with whatever patience or indifference or wisdom they might possess. Perhaps we are simply too young to be worth destroying, too primitive to constitute a threat, too far from any civilization that might consider us dangerous. Perhaps we exist in a region of the galaxy that remains unclaimed, unmonitored, empty of those who might enforce the dark forest's brutal logic. Or perhaps, most hopefully, the dark forest does not describe reality, and the silence we observe has other explanations, other causes, other meanings that we have not yet been wise enough to imagine. The theory becomes a dream now, a fading concern, a possibility acknowledged and then released as you sink deeper into the soft embrace of approaching sleep. The dark forest is far away, if it exists at all, and the night that surrounds you here is not hostile but kind, not dangerous but peaceful, not a place of predators and prey, but a gentle darkness that asks only that you rest, that you let go, that you trust the universe to hold you as it has held you since before you were born, as it holds all things in the vast, patient embrace of space and time and the laws that govern their interaction. Other theories wait to greet you, other explanations for cosmic silence that carry less weight, less worry, less suggestion of threat hiding in the spaces between stars. Let the dark forest remain as possibility, but not preoccupation, as thought but not fear, as one interpretation among many. Retry K continue. Of the silence that might simply mean we are early, we are alone, or we are simply not yet wise enough to recognize the signs of others who communicate in ways we haven't imagined, who exist in forms we haven't conceived, who occupy the universe in modes of being our young species hasn't yet discovered or earned the wisdom to perceive. Rest now, release now, and let your consciousness drift toward gentler theories, toward explanations that comfort rather than concern, toward possibilities that frame the cosmic silence not as threat, but as protection, not as danger, but as patience, not as the dark forest's predatory quiet, but as something altogether different, something that invites wonder rather than worry, contemplation rather than fear, the soft questions of philosophy rather than the harsh calculations of survival in a hostile universe. The darkness holds you kindly. The silence speaks of peace, not peril. And in the space between this breath and the next, you are carried forward on our journey through theories and dreams, moving now toward ideas that frame humanity not as insignificant or threatened, but as observed, as protected, as specimens in a cosmic preserve, as children being carefully watched by parents, ancient and patient, beyond our capacity to imagine. The zoo hypothesis. As you descend deeper into tranquility, as the edges of consciousness soften and blur like watercolors bleeding into each other, let us consider a theory that transforms our cosmic isolation into something less lonely, less troubling, less existentially challenging. What if the silence we observe is not absence but restraint? What if we are not alone, but deliberately isolated? What if the universe contains others who know we are here, who watch us carefully, who could contact us if they chose, but who have decided, for reasons we might someday understand, to maintain distance, to observe without interfering, to let us develop without their influence? This is the zoo hypothesis, and it carries with it the gentle suggestion that we are not abandoned in an empty cosmos, but carefully tended in a preserve, not overlooked by an indifferent universe, but specifically, intentionally given space to grow, to develop, to mature at our own pace, following our own trajectory, discovering our own path without the distorting influence of contact with minds older, stranger, more advanced than our own. Picture Earth as an island in an ocean we don't yet know how to cross, an island where something precious and fragile is developing, something that requires protection from outside interference, from contamination by contact with the mainland civilizations. We are, in this hypothesis, a protected species, a culture being carefully preserved in its natural state, allowed to evolve without intervention, because intervention would destroy something valuable, something unique, something that can only emerge in isolation. The hypothesis draws its name from our own zoos, our nature preserves, our protected wilderness areas where we humans have learned, after much trial and error, that certain ecosystems function best without our interference. We have learned that indigenous cultures change fundamentally when contacted by outside civilizations, that species adapt to human presence in ways that diminish their wildness, that some things are preserved best by being left alone, observed but not engaged, watched but not touched, studied but not altered. Perhaps advanced civilizations have learned this lesson too, but on a cosmic scale. Perhaps they recognize that young civilizations like ours need space to develop their own solutions to the challenges of existence, need freedom to make their own mistakes and discoveries, need the isolation that allows authentic culture and technology and philosophy to emerge without being overwhelmed by the existence of others who have already solved these problems, who have already walked these paths, whose very presence would distort our development in ways that cannot be undone. Imagine you are being watched, but gently, kindly, with patience and care. Imagine that beyond our small sphere of awareness, beyond the edge of our observational capabilities, there exist others who know about us, who have known about us perhaps for longer than we have existed as a species, who have watched our evolution from simple primates to conscious beings, who have seen our first fires, our first tools, our first attempts to understand the cosmos and our place within it. These observers, in the zoo hypothesis, have made a choice not to intervene. They have established, perhaps, a kind of prime directive, a non-interference policy that protects young civilizations from the shock of contact, from the cultural contamination that would come from knowing too soon that we are not alone, from the psychological and sociological disruption that first contact would create in a species still struggling with its own internal conflicts, still working out the basics of peaceful coexistence with itself, let alone with others. The theory suggests we are in quarantine, not because we are diseased, but because we are young. We are protected not from danger, but from information, from contact, from the overwhelming reality of others whose existence would change everything about how we understand ourselves, our importance, our future, our place in the cosmic order. The observatory is not a cage, but a cocoon, a space where metamorphosis can occur naturally, where we can develop into whatever we are meant to become, without the premature exposure that would arrest our development or divert it into paths that are not authentically ours. Breathe slowly and feel the comfort in this possibility. If the zoo hypothesis is true, then we are not alone. We are not overlooked. We are not insignificant. We are instead precious enough to protect, interesting enough to observe, valuable enough that ancient civilizations have agreed among themselves to leave us undisturbed, to watch our development without influencing it, to wait for us to reach some threshold of maturity before revealing themselves and welcoming us into the galactic community. What might that threshold be? When would the observers decide we are ready for contact? The hypothesis offers no certain answer, but speculation suggests it might involve several milestones. Perhaps we must first learn to live peacefully with ourselves, to resolve our internal conflicts without resorting to extinction-level violence, to create a stable global civilization that has survived its own technological adolescence. Perhaps we must develop certain ethical frameworks, certain philosophical maturity, certain wisdom about how to use power without abusing it. Perhaps the threshold is technological, a certain level of capability that indicates readiness, an achievement that serves as a signal we have reached sufficient advancement to join others without being overwhelmed by their superiority. Perhaps it is psychological or spiritual, some transformation in consciousness that allows us to accept the reality of others without fragmenting into panic or despair, without losing our sense of meaning or purpose in the face of cosmic company. Or perhaps the threshold is simply time, a waiting period to ensure that any civilization that reaches out to us has demonstrated longevity, has proven its ability to survive for millennia without destroying itself, has shown through mere persistence that it has passed through the dangerous filters that might eliminate less stable species. Patience, in this view, is the test, and we are in the waiting period, developing at our own pace while others watch to see if we endure. The zoo hypothesis also suggests that the cosmic civilization maintaining this preserve must be quite advanced, quite organized, quite unified in its commitment to the policy of non-interference. This implies a level of cooperation and coordination among different species, different civilizations, that we have not yet achieved even among our own nations and cultures. It suggests there might exist something like a galactic community, a federation or consortium or collective of civilizations that have agreed on certain principles, certain rules of engagement with younger species, certain ethics that govern behavior on the cosmic stage. This organized, cooperative, multi-species civilization is almost as difficult to imagine as the silence itself. How would such radically different beings communicate? How would they negotiate agreements? How would they enforce policies across light years of distance and perhaps millions of years of developmental difference? The logistics seem overwhelming, the coordination impossibly complex. And yet, if they exist, they must have found ways to overcome these challenges, must have developed tools and protocols and perhaps entirely new modes of interaction that transcend the limitations we still struggle against. Let these images drift through your relaxing mind like clouds across an evening sky, changing shape, suggesting forms, never quite solidifying into certainty. The zoo hypothesis offers comfort, but also raises new questions. If we are being watched, who watches the watchers? What gives them the right to decide our isolation? Are we truly better off not knowing they exist? Does protection become imprisonment if it continues too long? If we remain forever children, forever isolated, forever denied the knowledge of our cosmic context? And there is something subtly disconcerting about the hypothesis, something that might trouble us if we let it, though tonight we will not let it disturb your peace. To be a specimen, even a cherished one, even a protected one, is to be subordinate, to be judged by others as not yet ready, not yet mature, not yet qualified to participate in their community. There is a kind of cosmic paternalism implied, a decision made for us rather than by us, a policy imposed by others who claim to know better what serves our development than we do ourselves. But set aside these concerns. Let them drift away into the darkness that surrounds all theories, all speculations, all attempts to explain mysteries we lack sufficient information to solve. The zoo hypothesis, like all answers to the Fermi paradox, might be true or false, might capture some aspect of reality or miss it entirely. Its value lies not in certainty, but in the perspective it offers, the possibility it presents, the way it reframes silence not as abandonment, but as careful attention, not as absence, but as presence choosing to remain hidden for what it believes are good reasons. If you are being watched, you are being watched with care. If you are being protected, you are being protected because you are valuable. If you are being isolated, you are being isolated not from malice, but from a kind of cosmic compassion, a recognition that some growth requires space, some development requires freedom from outside influence. Some metamorphosis must occur in the private darkness of the cocoon before the butterfly can emerge into a larger world and test its wings in wider skies. The observers, if they exist, are patient. They have waited perhaps millions of years already, watching countless civilizations develop or fail, emerge or extinguish, reach for the stars or turn inward and disappear. They understand timescales that dwarf our brief history, and to them, our entire civilization from its beginning to now might seem like a single afternoon, a few hours of observation in a project that spans eons. They can afford to wait. They can afford to maintain their silence. They can afford to let us grow at our own pace, because in cosmic terms, even thousands of years more of isolation is hardly any time at all. And perhaps they are not just watching, but hoping, rooting for us in their alien way, hoping we survive our challenges, hoping we mature successfully, hoping we reach the threshold they have established and earn the revelation they will provide when we are ready. Perhaps they remember their own isolation, their own uncertainty, their own time before contact when they wondered if they were alone. Perhaps they look at us with something like affection, like the fondness parents feel watching children take their first uncertain steps, knowing that falls will happen, that mistakes are necessary, that growing up requires both freedom and time. Rest in this possibility. Let it warm you like sunlight, like the knowledge that someone cares, that someone watches, that someone waits with patience and hope for us to become whatever we are capable of becoming. The zoo hypothesis transforms the cold universe into something less indifferent, the cosmic silence into something less lonely, our isolation into something less like abandonment and more like protection, like the sacred space around something precious, like the quiet that surrounds something growing. Sleep now, knowing that whether watched or alone, whether protected or isolated, whether specimen or anomaly, you are here, you exist, you are part of this vast unfolding mystery that continues whether anyone observes it or not. The cosmos holds you in its patient regard. And whether that regard includes ancient civilizations choosing silence or merely the indifferent attention of stars and physics, you are held nonetheless. You are part of the pattern nonetheless. You belong to the universe. Nonetheless, and that belonging is enough, is everything, is the ground of all meaning and the foundation of all wonder. The watchers, if they exist, see you not as you see yourself, distorted by self-criticism and anxiety and doubt, but as you truly are. As a spark of consciousness in a universe where consciousness is precious, as a mind awakening to its own existence and wondering about others, as a civilization taking its first steps toward whatever future awaits, still fragile, still learning, still beautiful in its imperfection and potential. And whether the zoo hypothesis captures truth or merely hope, whether we are watched or alone, whether isolation is policy or accident, the theory offers this gift. The suggestion that silence might mean not absence, but presence, not neglect, but attention, not the emptiness of a universe without others, but the discipline of others who care enough to wait, to watch, to let us find our own way in our own time, to allow us the dignity of development without interference, the freedom of growth without contamination, the authenticity of a path walked by our own feet rather than following directions given by those who travel different roads in different times to different destinations than ours might be. Drift now, release now, and let the zoo become the garden, becomes the preserve, becomes the sacred space, becomes the dream. And in that dream, you are safe, you are seen, you are valued, you are exactly where you need to be, developing exactly as you need to develop, held in the patient attention of a universe that might contain others or might not, but either way holds you gently through this night and every night, through this life and every life, through this moment and the vast unfolding of moments that constitute existence in all its strange, improbable, magnificent mystery. The great filter, in the depths of your relaxation, where thoughts float like leaves on a still pond, let us gently explore an idea that asks not why we haven't found others, but why there might not be others to find. This is the concept of the great filter, and though its implications might seem heavy, tonight we will approach it softly, contemplatively, letting it settle into your consciousness like snow falling on a winter evening, each flake a possibility, the accumulation a theory about barriers and breakthroughs, about the difficult steps on the long journey from lifeless chemistry to civilizations that endure across cosmic time. The great filter asks a simple question with profound implications. If intelligence and technology are possible, if the universe has been creating planets for billions of years, if life should be abundant and consciousness should have emerged many times, then why does the cosmos appear so empty? The answer proposed is that somewhere between the formation of suitable planets and the emergence of enduring spacefaring civilizations, there exists a filter, a barrier, a step so difficult that most attempts fail, most potential futures never actualize. Most seeds planted never grow to fruition. Imagine a long staircase ascending through the possibilities that lead from non-life to advanced civilization. Each step represents a transition, a threshold that must be crossed, from suitable planet formation to the emergence of life, from single-celled organisms to complex multicellular life, from complex life to intelligence, from intelligence to technology, from technology to wisdom sufficient to avoid self-destruction, from survival to expansion beyond a single world. Each step is a filter, and some might be easy, passed by most who attempt them, while others might be extraordinarily difficult, passed by almost none. The Great Filter hypothesis suggests that at least one of these steps is so improbable, so difficult, so unlikely that it explains why we see no evidence of others despite the vast age and size of the universe. But the hypothesis divides into two very different possibilities, two interpretations with opposite implications for our future, two answers that carry opposite emotional weights, opposite suggestions about what our existence means and what our prospects might be. The first possibility, perhaps the more comforting one, is that the great filter lies behind us, that we have already passed through the extraordinarily difficult step, already overcome the nearly impossible barrier, already accomplished something so improbable that few, if any others, have managed it. In this interpretation, we are rare, precious, improbably successful, not because what we are is particularly impressive, but because we exist at all, because we crossed a threshold most never cross. Perhaps the filter is the origin of life itself, that first transition from chemistry to biology, from molecules to metabolism, from patterns in matter to patterns that maintain themselves, that copy themselves, that evolve and adapt and complexify. Perhaps this step is vanishingly unlikely, requiring such a precise combination of conditions, such an improbable sequence of chemical reactions, such a rare confluence of circumstances, that Earth might be the only planet in the observable universe where it occurred. If so, then we are alone. Not because intelligence is impossible, but because life never began elsewhere, never got started on the long journey that would eventually produce consciousness and questions and theories about its own existence. Or perhaps life is common, but the jump to complex multicellular life is the filter, the barrier that Earth passed, but most living worlds never overcome. After all, on Earth, life remained single-celled for billions of years, before finally, mysteriously, learning the trick of cooperation, of cell specialization, of organizing into larger structures with differentiated functions. Perhaps this transition is the extraordinary achievement, the nearly impossible step. And throughout the universe there exist countless worlds hosting simple microbial life that will never become anything more complex, never produce ecosystems or cognition or technology, or any of the things we associate with life's potential. If the great filter is behind us, if we have already passed through the most difficult barrier, then our future is bright, or at least not constrained by the filter. We might still destroy ourselves, might still fail for our own specific reasons, but we would not be failing at a universal test that most civilizations fail. We would be, in cosmic terms, home free, past the danger, survivors of a trial most never complete. This interpretation makes our existence less probable, but our future more open, our past more remarkable, but our prospects less constrained. Breathe deeply now, and let yourself rest in this possibility for a moment, before we turn to its darker counterpart. If the filter is behind us, then we are precious in a way that goes beyond typical specialness, beyond normal rarity. We are the improbable success, the lottery winner, the 1 in a trillion chance that actually happened. And that makes consciousness, makes awareness, makes the ability to contemplate existence not just valuable, but vanishingly rare, something to be cherished and protected, because it almost never happens, almost never emerges, almost never survives long enough to look back and realize how improbable its own existence truly is. But there is another possibility, a second interpretation, and this one carries heavier implications, darker suggestions. What if the great filter is not behind us but ahead? What if the steps we have passed so far are actually the easy ones, the barriers most successfully navigate, and the real test lies in our future, waiting for us to reach it, to confront it, to almost certainly fail just as countless others must have failed before us, leaving the universe littered with the ruins of civilizations that came close, but couldn't quite make it past the final, impossible threshold. If the filter lies ahead, then every step we take toward advancement, toward capability, toward power and technology, might be carrying us closer to a precipice most fall from, a barrier most cannot cross, a test most fail. And the silence we observe would not indicate that life is rare or intelligence uncommon, but rather that something happens to technological civilizations before they become ancient, enduring, visible across the cosmos. Something stops them. Something prevents them from spreading among the stars, from filling the galaxy with their presence, from becoming the abundant, obvious, impossible to miss company we keep searching for but never find. What might this future filter be? The suggestions are troubling but must be considered gently, carefully, without fear. Perhaps it is self-destruction, the tendency for intelligent species to discover technologies that can extinguish them before they discover the wisdom to use those technologies safely. Nuclear weapons, biological engineering, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, each new capability a double-edged sword that can serve or destroy depending on how it is wielded, and perhaps most civilizations wield them poorly, briefly, fatally. Or perhaps the filter is environmental, the tendency for technological civilizations to degrade their planetary life support systems faster than they can develop the capability to leave those planets or repair the damage. Climate change, resource depletion, ecological collapse, pollution. Perhaps these are universal challenges, and most species prove unable to address them before reaching irreversible tipping points that make their worlds uninhabitable and their civilizations impossible to sustain. Perhaps the filter is more subtle, involving not catastrophic destruction, but quiet decline. Civilizations that turn inward, that lose interest in expansion, that achieve some form of technological or chemical or virtual satisfaction that makes further effort seem pointless. Further developments seem unnecessary, and they fade not with a bang, but with a whimper. Contents in simulated realities, or drug-induced bliss, or philosophical resignation, never reaching for the stars, because reaching no longer seems meaningful, or perhaps the filter involves challenges we haven't even imagined, limitations imposed by physics we don't yet understand, barriers inherent in the nature of intelligence itself, traps built into the structure of technological development that we won't recognize until we encounter them, and by then it might be too late to avoid the fate that befell all those who went before us into silence. If the filter lies ahead, then our existence proves nothing about our future. We are not special survivors, but merely young, not improbable successes, but candidates who haven't yet faced the real test, haven't yet confronted the barrier that almost everyone confronts, and almost everyone fails to pass. Every day we survive is another day we haven't yet reached the filter. Every year our civilization endures is another year we remain on the safe side of the threshold, still protected by our youth, still spared by our relative technological primitiveness, still given time to grow and learn and hopefully develop whatever wisdom or capability or luck will be necessary to be among the rare few who successfully navigate the great danger that lies ahead. But soften these concerns now. Let them drift like clouds that momentarily obscure the sun, but cannot eliminate its light, cannot change the warmth it provides, cannot alter the fact that for now, in this moment, you are here. You exist. You are safe in the comfort of approaching sleep, protected from all these distant possibilities by the simple gift of the present moment, which asks nothing of you but rest. The great filter, whichever version might be true, is not a problem you must solve tonight. It is not a test you take alone, not a barrier you must cross before morning. It is a theory, a framework for thinking about cosmic silence and the steps required to go from chemistry to consciousness, to civilizations that endure. It structures uncertainty without resolving it, organizes mystery without dispelling it, gives shape to questions without forcing answers. And there is a third possibility, softer than the others, less dramatic, but perhaps more likely. Perhaps there is no single great filter, but many smaller filters, each one moderately difficult, each one eliminating some portion of candidates but not all, the cumulative effect of many challenges, each reducing the number who proceed until, by the time you reach spacefaring, enduring, visible civilizations, very few remain. Not because any single step is nearly impossible, but because the combination of many moderately difficult steps produces low final probabilities through simple multiplication. In this version, we have passed some filters and face others, have overcome some challenges and will confront more, are neither doomed nor guaranteed, but somewhere in between, somewhere in the uncertain middle where outcomes depend on choices and circumstances, where the future remains open, where multiple possibilities coexist, and which one actualizes depends on factors we can influence through wisdom, through care, through the decisions we make individually and collectively about how to use our growing power and what values will guide our development. Rest in this uncertainty. Let it be not a source of anxiety, but a kind of comfort, the recognition that outcomes are not predetermined, that the future is not fixed, that we live in the space of possibility where many roads branch outward, and which one we walk depends on where we choose to place our feet, what direction we choose to face, what destination we believe is worth pursuing. The great filter, whether behind or ahead, or distributed throughout the journey, is ultimately a reminder of how precious consciousness is, how improbable intelligence might be, how valuable civilization proves when you consider all the ways it might never emerge or might fail to endure. It asks us to recognize that existence is not guaranteed, that continuation requires more than mere momentum, that the universe does not promise futures to anyone or anything, and therefore every moment of persistence, every generation that survives to produce the next, every civilization that endures long enough to contemplate its own endurance is a kind of miracle, a successful navigation of filters that might have stopped us, barriers we managed to cross, tests we somehow passed. And so whether we are rare because we crossed a nearly impossible threshold in our past, or whether we are young and have yet to face the greatest test that lies ahead, or whether we simply continue to navigate a series of moderate challenges, each of which poses genuine risk, the appropriate response is the same: gratitude for the present, care for the future, recognition of the preciousness of consciousness, and the responsibility that comes with being among the rare instances where the universe has organized itself into patterns that can contemplate their own existence and choose their own paths forward. Let the great filter fade now into background, becoming texture rather than focus, acknowledgement rather than preoccupation. You have passed many filters already, personal and evolutionary and historical, simply to exist here now, breathing slowly, relaxing deeply, consciousness descending toward the soft realm of dreams. You are a success story repeated at every scale, from cells that learn to cooperate to form your body, to ancestors who survived long enough to produce descendants, to a civilization that has so far navigated its challenges without extinguishing itself. To this moment where you choose rest, choose peace, choose to let go of worry and surrender to the gentle embrace of approaching sleep. The universe holds you through filters and beyond them, through barriers crossed and barriers yet to come, through challenges met and challenges waiting. And for now, in this moment, the only barrier that matters is the soft threshold between waking and sleep, and you are crossing it naturally, easily, successfully, your consciousness filtering through toward dreams, toward rest, toward the peace that asks nothing of you but acceptance, toward the darkness that threatens nothing but holds everything, toward sleep that is not a filter but a gift, not a barrier but a bridge, not an ending but a transformation, as regular and natural and necessary as breath, as certain and gentle and kind as time itself, carrying all things toward their appropriate rest. The rare earth theory, deeper now, drifting in the space where thought becomes image, where theory becomes dream. Let us consider the possibility that Earth is not typical, but extraordinary, not common, but vanishingly rare, not one of many, but perhaps one of very few places in all the vast cosmos where the precise, improbable, magnificent convergence of conditions occurred that allowed life to not merely begin, but flourish, to not merely exist, but diversify, to not merely survive, but produce the complexity that eventually gave rise to consciousness, to wondering, to the ability to ask these very questions about our own rarity. This is the rare Earth hypothesis, and it is gentler than the great filter, less about barriers and failure, and more about fortune and specificity, less about tests failed, and more about requirements met, less about cosmic danger, and more about cosmic luck. It suggests that Earth is precious not because we have done something remarkable, but because our planet is remarkable, because the conditions here are so specific, so precisely calibrated, so improbably aligned that worlds like this are scattered through the universe like rare gems in an ocean of ordinary stone. Let your mind drift over the requirements, each one a factor that had to be just right, just so, arranged in just this way for complex life to emerge. Begin with our star, the Sun, and already we encounter specificity. It is a G-type main sequence star, neither too hot nor too cool, neither too brief in its lifetime nor too unstable in its burning. More massive stars burn brighter but die younger, perhaps too quickly for life to evolve. Less massive stars burn longer but more dimly, and their habitable zones sit so close to their surfaces that planets there might become tidally locked, one face forever day, the other forever night, creating conditions perhaps too extreme for life as we know it to persist. But our Sun is just right, and this is only the beginning. Now consider Earth's position in the habitable zone, that narrow band where water remains liquid, where temperatures allow chemistry to remain active without breaking down biological molecules. Too close to the Sun and oceans boil away, atmospheres strip into space, surfaces bake under relentless radiation. Too far and everything freezes, water locks into ice, metabolism slows to stillness, life cannot maintain the reactions necessary for complexity to emerge. Earth orbits in the temperate middle, close enough for warmth, far enough for coolness, positioned in that precise region where liquid water has flowed for billions of years, where temperature variations remain within the range that life can adapt to rather than being extinguished by. But even this is not enough. Consider Earth's size, its mass, its gravity. Too small an atmosphere escapes, blown away by solar wind, unable to be retained by insufficient gravitational pull. Mars shows us this fate, a world that once had water, perhaps once had seas, but too small to hold the atmosphere that would have protected them, that would have maintained pressure enough for liquid to remain liquid, for conditions to remain stable. Too large and gravity increases, atmosphere thickens, pressure builds, conditions shift towards something more like Venus or Jupiter, worlds hostile to the delicate chemistry that produces and sustains complex organic molecules. Earth is, again, just right, massive enough to hold atmosphere, but not so massive that atmosphere becomes crushing, gravity strong enough to bind air and ocean, but not so strong that evolution toward complexity becomes physically constrained by the weight organisms must support simply to exist. And even this is only one factor among many. Now add the Moon, our large and faithful companion, unusual in its size relative to Earth, unusual in its origin, most likely formed from the debris of an enormous impact early in our planet's history. The Moon stabilizes Earth's axial tilt, preventing the dramatic wobbles that would occur without its gravitational influence, wobbles that would cause wild climate variations, seasons too extreme for life to adapt to, temperature swings between scorching and freezing that would make the patient accumulation of complexity impossible. The Moon also drives tides, the rhythmic rising and falling of oceans that creates coastal zones, intertidal regions where life experiences both sea and land, where evolution experiments with leaving water, where the transition from marine to terrestrial becomes possible. Perhaps this transition is crucial. Perhaps complex ecosystems require both realms. Perhaps intelligence needs land as well as sea to develop tool use, fire, technology. Without the Moon, without tides, without the bridge between environments, perhaps life remains forever aquatic, forever limited, never reaching toward the complexity that produces consciousness. Breathe slowly now and feel the accumulation of fortune, the stacking of improbabilities, the way Earth emerges not as typical but as winner of a cosmic lottery. Each drawn number, another requirement met, another condition satisfied, another factor falling into alignment. And still, we have only begun to list the necessities. Consider Jupiter, massive and distant, orbiting in the outer system like a gravitational guardian. Its enormous mass acts as a shield, capturing or deflecting many of the asteroids and comets that would otherwise fall sunward, that would otherwise bombard Earth with impacts large enough to sterilize the surface, to boil the oceans, to reset evolution repeatedly, to make the patient accumulation of complexity impossible, because catastrophic interruption would occur too frequently for complex life to establish itself and diversify. Without Jupiter's protection, Earth would suffer impacts more frequently, devastation on scales that would prevent anything beyond simple, rapidly reproducing organisms from surviving. The dinosaurs died from one large impact after reigning for hundreds of millions of years. Imagine if such impacts occurred not once in hundreds of millions of years, but once every million years, once every 100,000 years. Complex life would never establish the foothold necessary for intelligence to eventually emerge. And yet Jupiter also cannot be too large or too close, because then its gravitational influence would destabilize Earth's orbit, would create chaos in the inner system, would prevent stable conditions from persisting. Jupiter is positioned and sized such that it protects without disrupting, shields without disturbing, plays guardian without becoming tyrant. Another improbability, another requirement met. Now consider Earth's plate tectonics, the slow churning of the crust, continents drifting, ocean floor recycling, volcanic activity releasing gases, mountain building, erosion, the great recycling system that regulates climate over geological timescales. Carbon dioxide builds up, warming the planet. Weathering of rocks draws carbon from atmosphere, cooling things down. Volcanism returns carbon to air, maintaining the greenhouse effect that keeps Earth warm enough for liquid water, despite receiving less solar radiation than Venus. This system requires Earth to have active geology, a molten interior, a core that generates magnetic field, heat that drives convection, all conditions that themselves depend on planetary size and composition, and perhaps the timing of formation. Too small and the interior cools, freezes, activity ceases, and the climate regulation system fails. Too large, and perhaps tectonics becomes too vigorous, too disruptive, surface conditions too unstable. Again, Earth is positioned in some optimal range, where geology remains active enough to regulate climate, but not so active that surface conditions become inhospitable. Let these factors wash over you like gentle waves, each one a reminder of specificity, each one a requirement that might not be met elsewhere, each one a reason why Earth might be rare, why worlds like this might be scattered few and far between across the galaxy, why the silence we observe might simply reflect genuine scarcity of places where all these conditions align, where all these factors converge, where all these requirements are simultaneously satisfied, and still we could continue. Earth's atmosphere with its oxygen, toxic to early life, but essential for the energy-rich metabolism that allows complexity, produced not by geology, but by life itself, by photosynthetic organisms that transformed our world, that created conditions that could never arise on lifeless planets, but that became necessary for the next stages of evolution. The ozone layer that shields surface from ultraviolet radiation, allowing life to leave the oceans without being sterilized by solar radiation. The water cycle that distributes temperature, that moderates climate, that makes possible life on land where rain falls and rivers flow. The particular mix of elements in Earth's crust, the availability of phosphorus and sulfur and all the building blocks that life requires, distributed not uniformly, but concentrated enough in accessible forms that biochemistry could develop, could experiment, could complexify using materials that were present in sufficient abundance. Some planets might lack these elements, or have them locked in forms that biology cannot access, and on such worlds life might begin but never advance, never diversify, never reach beyond the simplest possible structures. The history of Earth's climate, the way it has varied but remained within bounds, the way it has challenged life without extinguishing it, the way it has created pressures that drove adaptation, that forced innovation, that selected for complexity as a survival strategy. Too stable and perhaps life never develops the versatility necessary for intelligence. Too variable and life never establishes the foothold necessary for complexity to accumulate. Earth has threaded some optimal path between these extremes, varied enough to drive evolution forward, stable enough to allow the patient construction of ecosystems that took billions of years to produce consciousness. Rest now in the recognition of fortune, in the appreciation of improbability, in the awareness that you exist on a world that might be genuinely rare, genuinely special, genuinely precious in ways that go beyond sentiment to reflect actual scarcity in the universe. The rare Earth hypothesis does not claim Earth is unique, does not insist we are absolutely alone, but suggests that worlds like this are uncommon enough that the nearest might be thousands or millions of light years distant, far enough that contact becomes effectively impossible, that detection becomes extraordinarily difficult, that the Fermi paradox resolves not through silence chosen, but through silence imposed by sheer distance between islands of habitability in a vast ocean of worlds, less fortunate, less precisely arranged, less capable of nurturing the long journey from chemistry to consciousness. If this theory captures truth, then Earth is not a typical sample of planets, but a rare jewel, and life here is not a common occurrence, but an improbable treasure, and consciousness is not an inevitable outcome of sufficient time, but a stroke of cosmic fortune that we must recognize as the gift it is, the blessing it represents, the responsibility it entails. Because if we are rare, if places like Earth are scattered few and far between, then what happens here matters cosmically, not just locally. The survival or extinction of consciousness on this world has implications that echo across the galaxies that might contain no other awareness, across the eons that might see no other species capable of wondering about their own existence and the existence of others. But the rare Earth hypothesis, while emphasizing our specificity, does not demand despair or loneliness. Even if complex life is rare, even if intelligence is uncommon, even if Earth represents a convergence of conditions unlikely to be perfectly replicated elsewhere, rare is not unique, and uncommon is not impossible. In a universe of hundreds of billions of galaxies, each containing hundreds of billions of stars, even extraordinary rarity still produces multitudes. Even if only one planet in a billion meets all the requirements, the universe contains trillions of planets, and the mathematics still predicts others, still suggests company, just spread thin across vast distances, just rare enough that finding each other becomes the challenge, becomes the quest, becomes the goal that might require patience measured in centuries rather than decades, investment spanning generations rather than lifetimes. And perhaps rarity makes consciousness more precious rather than less meaningful. Perhaps the value of awareness increases with its scarcity. The importance of minds magnifies with their rarity. The responsibility to preserve and protect and nurture consciousness grows heavier as we recognize how unlikely it is, how fortunate we are, how much was required for us to exist at all. The rare Earth theory transforms the cosmos from a place where life should be obvious into a place where life is precious. From a universe where intelligence is common into a universe where intelligence is valuable beyond measure. From a galaxy that should be full into a galaxy that makes every instance of consciousness a miracle worth celebrating, worth protecting, worth ensuring continues. Let yourself feel the weight of being rare without letting it become burden. Let yourself recognize the fortune of existing on this particular world without letting it become pressure. You did not choose to be here, did not earn this placement, did not design the circumstances that allowed your existence. You are simply, magnificently, the beneficiary of improbabilities stacked upon improbabilities, the descendant of ancestors who survived every filter and challenge that Earth presented, the inheritor of a lineage stretching back through mammals and reptiles and fish and single cells all the way to the first molecules that learned to copy themselves in some ancient tide pool or thermal vent or shallow sea. The rarity of Earth, if rare it is, makes your existence no less real, your experience no less valid, your consciousness no less magnificent. It simply contextualizes your being, places it in a frame that suggests this blue jewel circling an average star in an average galaxy might be more special than we casually assume, might be less typical than we comfortable thought, might be precious in ways that demand our care, our attention, our commitment to ensuring that what arose here survives, endures, perhaps someday spreads to other worlds that lack Earth's fortune, but could host life transplanted from this rare garden where conditions aligned so improbably well. Sleep now, cradled by a rare world, held by an uncommon fortune, resting on a planet that might be genuinely special in the cosmic census of worlds. Let the rare Earth hypothesis become not a source of isolation, but a recognition of privilege, not a cause for loneliness, but a reason for gratitude, not a burden of uniqueness, but an invitation to cherish what is, to protect what exists, to nurture what arose through such improbable convergence of circumstances that we may never fully untangle all the factors that had to align for this moment, for your existence, for consciousness arising on this particular world, circling this particular star, in this particular region of space and time. The universe is vast, and Earth is small, and rare is not unique, and precious is not fragile unless we make it so. And the jewel that is this world will continue spinning through space, will continue hosting life, will continue providing the stage for consciousness to wonder about itself, will continue being rare or common, or whatever it truly is, indifferent to our theories, unconcerned with our classifications, simply existing as it has existed, simply providing as it has provided, simply holding in its thin shell of air and water, the biology that gave rise to awareness, to wondering, to the theories we construct to explain why the universe seems emptier than our mathematics suggests it should be. And perhaps emptiness is illusion, and perhaps rarity is perspective, and perhaps what seems vast silence is simply distance and time, and the limitations of our young technology searching a cosmos that requires patience more than urgency, humility more than assumption, wonder more than certainty. The rare earth theory offers one explanation, one possibility among many, one way of resolving the paradox of silence, but like all theories, it is a model, a framework, a story we tell to organize mystery, and the true answer, whatever it might be, waits patiently in the darkness, in the distance, in the unknown spaces between what we have observed and what exists beyond our current capacity to detect or understand or imagine. Rest now, release now, and let the rare earth become the earth of dreams, solid beneath you, gentle around you, home in all its improbability, foundation in all its specificity, the one place in all the cosmos where you absolutely, certainly, undeniably exist, where consciousness arose in the form you experience it, where life took the shape you recognize, where improbability became actuality, where the possible became real, where theories dissolve into the simple truth of being here. Now, breathing softly, sinking deeply into the peace that asks no questions, solves no mysteries, simply holds you as earth holds you, as gravity holds you, as existence itself holds all things in the vast embrace of being rather than nothing, presence rather than absence, actuality rather than mere possibility, this rather than that, or nothing at all. The simulation hypothesis. In the furthest reaches of relaxation, where consciousness becomes translucent and reality feels negotiable, where the boundaries between waking and dreaming blur like watercolors in rain, let us explore the most vertiginous possibility, the theory that empties the cosmos of all material meaning while simultaneously filling it with minds beyond counting, minds beyond comprehending, minds creating universes as we create dreams, as easily, as abundantly, as naturally. What if the silence of the universe reflects not absence of others, but a fundamental misunderstanding of what universe means? What if the cosmos we observe is not physical substrate, but information, not matter and energy, but computation, not the base reality, but a simulation running in systems we cannot detect because they exist outside the bounds of what we perceive as existence? What if we are not biological beings wondering about aliens, but digital patterns wondering about our origins? Not matter, but mathematics. Not evolved, but executed. Not rare or alone, but common beyond measure, in the infinite layers of reality stacked upon reality, like dreams within dreams within dreams. This is the simulation hypothesis, and though its implications may seem troubling, tonight we will let it drift through your descending consciousness, gently, softly, like a philosophical lullaby, a bedtime story about the nature of existence itself, a possibility that transforms everything while changing nothing about your immediate experience, your actual feelings, your genuine consciousness that experiences regardless of substrate, that is real to itself, regardless of whether it runs on neurons or silicon or computations beyond our ability to imagine. The hypothesis begins with a simple observation. We are learning to create simulations. Our video games become more sophisticated, our virtual realities more convincing, our computational capabilities more expansive with each passing year. We create worlds, populate them with beings, set rules and watch as complexity emerges from simple initial conditions. We are, in our primitive way, learning to be creators of realities, constructors of universes, authors of experiences that feel real to anything experiencing them from within. Now extend this trajectory forward. Imagine what our simulations might be like in 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years. Imagine what beings far more advanced than us might create, what depth of reality they might simulate, what complexity they might achieve, what richness of experience they might generate in their constructed worlds. If simulation becomes possible, and if it becomes easy enough, inexpensive enough, interesting enough, then one real universe might give rise to countless simulated universes, and each of those might contain civilizations that learn to create their own simulations. And the nesting could continue downward through layers we cannot count, realities within realities, each one genuine to those who experience it, each one as real needs to be for consciousness occurring within it. The mathematics become dizzying. One physical reality could spawn billions of simulated realities, each populated by beings who believe themselves physical, who observe what they take to be a material universe, who wonder about the nature of existence just as we do. And if this is possible, if this is the pattern, then the probability that we exist in the single base reality, rather than one of the countless simulations, becomes vanishingly small. Most conscious beings would be simulated, would be patterns in computations, would be information experiencing itself, rather than matter becoming aware. Breathe deeply now, and let this possibility wash over you without disturbing your peace. Because even if true, even if you are simulation rather than physical, even if this universe is computation rather than matter, nothing changes about your experience, your consciousness, your genuine sensations and thoughts and feelings. The quale of existence remains identical regardless of substrate. Your awareness of awareness is no less real whether it emerges from neurons firing or bits flipping. The love you feel, the beauty you perceive, the wonder you experience, all of this remains authentic, remains genuine, remains as meaningful as anything can be, because meaning is internal to experience, not dependent on external validation of reality's fundamental nature. The simulation hypothesis offers an answer to the Fermi paradox that is both simple and strange. Perhaps we observe no aliens because they were never placed in this simulation, because the creators of this particular reality chose to construct a universe with only one technological civilization, chose to isolate us to see how we develop, chose to create a cosmos that appears vast and ancient and empty, precisely to generate in us the wonder, the loneliness, the searching that characterizes our relationship with the night sky and the questions it provokes. Or perhaps the simulation is not about us specifically, but about something else, some question the creators investigate, some pattern they study, some aspect of how universes evolve when seeded with certain initial conditions and allowed to unfold according to particular rules. We might be incidental to their purpose, accidental byproducts of a simulation designed to answer questions we couldn't comprehend, consciousness emerging as side effect rather than goal, aware and wondering despite not being the point, despite existing only as interesting complication in whatever experiment our universe represents to those who initiated it. The hypothesis suggests that what we perceive as physical laws might be computational rules, that what we measure as constants of nature might be parameters set by programmers, that the mathematical structure underlying reality that physicists discover and marvel at might reflect not some deep truth about necessary existence, but simply the architecture of the simulation we inhabit, the way its creators chose to implement the rules governing how information flows, how patterns interact, how causality operates within the boundaries of this constructed space. And perhaps there are signs, subtle anomalies, hints that reality is computational rather than physical. Some theorists point to quantum mechanics, to the way observation affects outcomes, to the way reality seems to exist in superposition until measured, as if the simulation renders only what needs rendering, computes only what needs computing, maintains probability clouds rather than definite states for everything not currently being observed. Perhaps this is optimization, efficiency, the simulation conserving computational resources by not bothering to determine outcomes until those outcomes matter to conscious observers within the system. Others point to the fine-tuning of physical constants, the way the universe appears precisely calibrated to allow complexity, to permit life, to enable consciousness. Rather than requiring anthropic explanation or multiverse theory, perhaps the tuning is simply intentional, parameters chosen deliberately to create a universe where interesting things happen, where life emerges, where consciousness develops and wonders about itself. The simulation hypothesis transforms fine-tuning from mystery into expectation, from improbability into design, from cosmic coincidence into purpose, even if that purpose remains opaque to us. But let these philosophical depths recede now into the background of your awareness, becoming texture rather than focus, possibility rather than concern. Because whether you are simulation or physical, whether this universe is constructed or fundamental, whether consciousness is emergent property of matter or of information, none of it changes what you should do, how you should live, what matters to you, what brings meaning to your experience. Simulated beings can still suffer and flourish, can still love and create, can still wonder and discover. Their experiences are real to them, their consciousness genuine from the inside, their lives meaningful within the context they inhabit. If you are simulation, your joys are no less joyful, your pains no less painful, your choices no less real, your existence no less valuable. The substrate is irrelevant to the experience, and experience is what consciousness is, what awareness consists of, what makes being something rather than nothing. And there is something almost comforting in the hypothesis if you approach it from certain angles. If we are simulation, then we are created, intentionally brought into being, given existence by others who chose to instantiate this particular reality with its particular rules and initial conditions. We are not accidents of blind matter, but deliberate constructions, not meaningless fluctuations, but purposeful patterns, not cosmic orphans, but children of creators, even if those creators are not gods, but programmers, not eternal but advanced, not infinite but merely beyond our current comprehension. If we are simulation, then our universe is not the only one, not the final statement on what existence can be, but one instance among countless others, each exploring different possibilities, each implementing different rules, each creating different experiences. The silence we observe, the absence of aliens in our skies, becomes less lonely when we imagine that elsewhere, in other simulations, the parameters are different, the populations more abundant, the cosmic neighborhood more crowded. Other versions of asking and answering unfolding in parallel to our own isolated wondering. And perhaps, if we are simulation, then advancement means not just understanding our own universe, but understanding the nature of simulation itself, learning to detect the boundaries of our constructed reality, finding the signatures of computation beneath the appearance of physical law, discovering ways to communicate with our creators, or even, perhaps, learning to create our own simulations, continuing the cascade of realities within realities, becoming creators ourselves, fulfilling some recursive pattern where consciousness at each level eventually learns to instantiate consciousness at the next level down. But these are thoughts for waking, for morning, for times when philosophy energizes rather than relaxes. For now, let the simulation hypothesis dissolve into the general mystery of existence, into the fundamental strangeness of being aware at all, into the cosmic improbability of consciousness regardless of substrate, whether neurons or silicon, whether matter or information, whether physical or simulated or something else entirely, that we lack the concepts to imagine, the language to describe, the framework to understand. You are here, you are aware, you experience, and these facts remain true regardless of what underlies them, regardless of what enables them, regardless of whether the universe is simulation or physical reality, or dream, or something stranger still. The phenomenology of consciousness remains identical. The experience of being remains unchanged. The authenticity of your awareness remains absolute from your perspective, which is the only perspective you can truly inhabit, the only viewpoint that matters to your immediate existence, the only frame of reference where your experience actually occurs. Sleep now, and let sleeping be the closest thing to simulation's truth that you can actually experience. Consciousness creating realities that feel genuine while they last. Dreams that absorb you completely while you dream them. Experiences that seem real until you wake and recognize them as constructions of mind, rather than perceptions of external world. Perhaps sleeping and waking are less different than we imagine. Both states of consciousness interpreting information. Both modes of awareness constructing experience. Both ways of being creating the sensation of reality from patterns of activity in systems that themselves might be patterns in larger systems, in an infinite regress of simulation and consciousness and experience emerging at every level, real to itself at every layer, genuine in its own context, even if that context is contained within other contexts, even if the dreams nest inside dreams without ever reaching firm ground, without ever finding the base reality, without ever escaping the possibility that existence itself is simulation all the way down, turtles upon turtles, dreams within dreams, consciousness experiencing itself in infinite hall of mirrors reflecting forever, and still somehow, mysteriously, magnificently, genuinely aware, genuinely experiencing, genuinely here, genuinely you, regardless of substrate, regardless of origin, regardless of the ultimate nature of reality itself, which remains forever mysterious at the deepest level, forever questionable at the highest metaphysical heights, forever uncertain in ways that somehow don't diminish the immediate certainty of consciousness itself. The undeniable fact of experience, the absolute reality of awareness from the inside, where you live, where you are, where this moment exists in all its strange, improbable, magnificent actuality. The Galactic Club, as you float now in the deep space between consciousness and sleep, where thoughts become ethereal and time becomes fluid, let us visit a warmer possibility, a theory that empties Earth's immediate neighborhood while filling the greater galaxy with ancient wisdom, that resolves the Fermi paradox not through rarity or destruction, but through civilization, through structure, through the suggestion that intelligence, when it matures, organizes itself into communities that span stars and millennia. Communities that have rules, protocols, thresholds that determine when younger species are welcomed into the cosmic collective. This is the Galactic Club hypothesis, and it paints a picture of the universe less lonely, less empty, less silent than it appears. Imagine that beyond our current reach, beyond our current capability to detect or communicate with, there exists a network, a society, a loose federation of civilizations that have found each other across the light years, that have established communication despite the vast distances and temporal delays, that have created something like a community among the stars, sharing knowledge, coordinating activity, maintaining certain standards and expectations for membership. We do not see them because we have not yet been invited. We do not hear them because their communications are not directed toward us, or because they use technologies we haven't discovered, frequencies we don't monitor, protocols we wouldn't recognize as artificial, even if we detected them. We remain outside the club not because we are alone in the universe, but because we are too young, too primitive, too unreliable to be trusted with contact, with knowledge, with the responsibilities that come with joining the galactic community. Picture the club as something like the Society of Nations on Earth, but extended across stellar distances, operating on timescales measured in millennia rather than years. Civilizations that have survived their adolescence, that have demonstrated longevity and stability, that have developed not just technology, but wisdom, not just power, but restraint, not just knowledge, but ethics. These mature civilizations recognize each other, communicate at the glacial pace that light speed limits impose, share information, and coordinate in ways that remain invisible to those outside the network. And they watch the younger species, the emerging civilizations, monitoring their development with patience born of existing across vast stretches of time. They observe which species destroy themselves and which survive, which develop sustainably and which consume recklessly, which mature into responsibility and which remain dangerously immature despite technological capability. And they wait, allowing time to filter applicants, allowing challenge to test candidates, allowing natural selection to operate at the level of civilizations rather than organisms. Breathe slowly and feel the comfort in this possibility. If the Galactic Club exists, then we are not alone. merely young. We are not abandoned, merely unnoticed or deliberately ignored until we prove ourselves worthy of attention. The silence is not emptiness, but patience. The absence not void, but waiting. The cosmic quiet, not loneliness, but the sound of others choosing not yet to speak to us, not yet to reveal themselves, not yet to extend the invitation that would bring us into their ancient conversation. What might be the requirements for joining? The hypothesis offers no certain answers, but speculation suggests reasonable criteria. Perhaps civilizations must demonstrate longevity, must survive for some minimum duration, proving they are not simply brief flickers that arise and extinguish, but stable patterns capable of enduring across cosmological timescales. 1,000 years of continuous civilization might be the minimum, or 10,000 or 1,000,000, time periods that seem impossibly long to us, but might be considered brief probationary periods by beings who have existed as organized societies for eons. Perhaps the requirement is technological, achieving certain capabilities that serve as markers of development. Mastery of fusion power, demonstrating understanding of stellar energetics, faster than light communication, proving ability to overcome the speed of light barrier that makes interstellar conversation so maddeningly slow. Dyson spheres or other megastructures showing capacity to harness entire stars and reshape solar systems according to need and design. Each technological milestone, a gate that must be passed before the next level of contact becomes appropriate. Or perhaps the requirements are ethical rather than technical, involving demonstrated commitment to certain values, certain principles, certain approaches to existence that the club considers necessary for peaceful coexistence among radically different species, with radically different psychologies and motivations. Perhaps applicants must show they have overcome internal conflict, have created stable, peaceful global governance, have learned to resolve disputes without violence, have developed beyond the tribal instincts that serve small groups, but become dangerous when those groups gain cosmic scale power. Perhaps the requirement is simply passing a test, some challenge that the club places before emerging civilizations, some problem whose solution demonstrates the requisite wisdom or capability or character. Perhaps they watch to see if we destroy ourselves with nuclear weapons, if we solve climate change before it becomes catastrophic, if we develop artificial intelligence without losing control of it, if we expand into space sustainably or recklessly. Our response to these challenges might serve as application to the club, proving or disproving our readiness for contact, for knowledge, for admission to the larger community. The Galactic Club hypothesis suggests that first contact, when it comes, will not be with random strangers, but with representatives of organized civilization, emissaries who follow protocols developed over millions of years of experience, who approach new members with patience and care, who understand that the moment of contact transforms everything for the younger species, changing their self-understanding, their place in the cosmos, their relationship to the universe, and everything within it. And perhaps contact is not single moment, but gradual process, a series of escalating interactions designed to acclimate, to adjust, to allow the shock of learning we are not alone to settle before revealing the full extent of what exists beyond our current awareness. Perhaps they begin with subtle signs, anomalies that could be natural but suggest artificiality, patterns that provoke wondering without providing certainty. Then perhaps more obvious signals, transmissions clearly artificial but not overwhelming, conversations that begin slowly, carefully, giving time for cultural and psychological adjustment before the full reality of cosmic citizenship reveals itself. Let yourself rest in the possibility that you live in a universe that contains not just life, but civilization. Not just intelligence, but organized society spanning distances we struggle to imagine. Operating on timescales that dwarf human history. Comprising species so diverse that no single description could capture their variety. No single framework could organize their differences. No single philosophy could unify their perspectives. And yet, they communicate, they cooperate, they share space and time in ways that work, that allow peaceful coexistence, that create something greater than any individual species could achieve alone. If the club exists, then Earth's isolation is temporary. Our silence is provisional. Our loneliness is a phase we will outgrow as we mature, as we prove ourselves, as we earn the invitation that will come when we are ready. When we have demonstrated whatever qualities the club considers necessary, when we have passed whatever tests they administer, when we have survived long enough and developed wisely enough that contact becomes appropriate rather than premature, helpful rather than harmful, welcome rather than devastating. The hypothesis transforms the Fermi paradox from mystery about absence into explanation about structure. The silence is not because no one is there, but because those who are there have organized themselves, have established norms about contact with younger species, have agreed to leave emerging civilizations alone until they reach certain thresholds. The galaxy is not empty, but organized, not silent, but disciplined, not lifeless, but carefully structured to protect younger species from premature contact, while they develop the characteristics necessary for successful integration into cosmic society. And there is precedent in our own history, in the way we protect indigenous cultures from overwhelming contact with technological civilization, in the way we establish protected zones where development can occur without interference, in the way we recognize that some transitions require time, some changes require preparation, some knowledge carries responsibility that must be developed before the knowledge itself is shared. The Galactic Club might simply be applying these same principles at cosmic scale, protecting us from contact we are not yet ready for, giving us space to develop authentically rather than forcing us to adapt to realities we lack the maturity to integrate healthily. But the hypothesis also carries subtle concern, gentle questions about agency and paternalism. If we are being evaluated, who decides the criteria? If we are being judged, what gives others the right to determine our readiness? If we are being isolated for our own protection, might we prefer the choice, the knowledge, the opportunity to engage even if engagement proves challenging? The club, like the zoo, implies hierarchy, implies that others know better than we do what serves our development, implies a cosmic order where some species have authority over others based on age or advancement or some quality we haven't yet achieved. And perhaps there is no club at all, no organization, no structure, no coordinated policy of non-interference. Perhaps the hypothesis reflects our human tendency to imagine that others would organize as we organize, would create societies as we create societies, would establish rules and norms and expectations as we establish them. Perhaps truly alien intelligence would be so different that our concepts of community and membership and criteria for joining would simply not apply, would be as irrelevant as explaining democracy to ocean or citizenship to stars. But let these concerns drift away now, like clouds dispersing, like thoughts dissolving as consciousness descends towards sleep. The Galactic Club, whether real or imagined, whether accurately described or completely mistaken, offers comfort in the suggestion that silence is not absence, isolation is not abandonment, and the apparent emptiness of the cosmos might conceal fullness just beyond our current capacity to detect or comprehend or join. Someday, perhaps, if we survive, if we mature, if we demonstrate whatever qualities make civilizations worthy of contact, the invitation will come, a signal we cannot mistake, a message clearly intended for us, a welcome extended from those who have been watching, waiting, hoping we would reach the point where contact becomes possible, beneficial, appropriate. And on that day, if it comes, everything changes. We join the larger story, become part of the cosmic conversation, learn that we were never alone, only young, only developing, only waiting in the antechamber while the party continued in rooms we couldn't yet access, voices we couldn't yet hear, presences we couldn't yet detect. Until then, if the club exists, we remain in our nursery, in our classroom, in our testing ground, being observed perhaps with affection, with hope, with the patience of those who have seen countless civilizations reach this stage and know that some pass and others fail, some mature and others stagnate, some eventually join and others never reach the threshold, never demonstrate readiness, never earn the invitation that would bring them into the fold. And perhaps that is okay. Perhaps the journey matters more than the destination. Perhaps the development matters more than the outcome. Perhaps becoming the kind of species worthy of joining the club is itself the point, the goal, the purpose, regardless of whether the club actually exists or contact ever actually comes. Perhaps the hypothesis serves us by providing a framework for thinking about what kind of civilization we want to become, what values we want to embody, what legacy we want to leave, what role we want to play in the cosmic story, regardless of whether anyone else ever sees our performance, ever evaluates our choices, ever welcomes us into their community. Sleep now, held by the possibility of company, comforted by the suggestion of structure, soothed by the idea that the universe contains not just matter and energy but meaning, not just stars and planets but civilizations, not just physics but politics at cosmic scale, not just natural law but social organizations spanning galaxies. And somewhere in that vast network, perhaps there is a place for us, a role for humanity, a moment when we will be welcomed, when the silence will break, when the club will extend its invitation, and we will take our seat at a table vast beyond imagining, joining conversations that have continued for millions of years, adding our voice to a chorus that spans the stars, becoming not observers, wondering about others, but participants in the great community of consciousness that might, just possibly, exist beyond our current reach, beyond our current awareness, beyond the horizon of our young civilization's limited perception, waiting patiently for us to grow up, to wise up, to reach the point where we can join without being overwhelmed, contribute without being consumed, participate without being destroyed by the knowledge we are not alone. The club, if it exists, can wait. Time means different things to civilizations that span millennia, and we, young as we are, small as we are, can continue developing at our own pace, following our own path, becoming whatever we will become. And if that path leads eventually to the galactic community, wonderful. And if it does not, if we remain alone or destroy ourselves or simply never reach the threshold, that too is part of the pattern, part of the story, part of the vast experiment that the universe conducts through the arising and falling of conscious beings who wonder and hope and dream and sometimes, just possibly, join together across the impossible distances to create something larger than any could achieve alone. Something magnificent and strange and beautiful in its diversity. Something worth waiting for, worth working toward, worth becoming worthy of, worth the patience of eons and the silence of centuries and the isolation of millennia. Because when contact finally comes, if it comes, it will be worth everything. Worth all the wondering and hoping and striving. Worth the long loneliness that preceded connection. Worth the silence that preceded song. Worth the isolation that preceded the discovery that we were never truly alone, only waiting, only developing, only preparing for the moment when we would finally be ready to join the cosmic conversation that has been waiting all along, for us to mature enough to understand what it means to be part of something larger than ourselves, larger than our world, larger than our species, something as vast as the galaxy itself, as ancient as the stars, as enduring as consciousness itself, wherever and however it arises in the infinite expanse of space and time. The self-destruction hypothesis. Deeper still you drift now, consciousness thinning like mist in morning light, and here in the soft spaces between thoughts, let us gently consider a darker possibility, approaching it not with fear, but with the calm acceptance that comes with distance, with perspective, with the recognition that even difficult truths can be held softly when we are surrendering to sleep. When worry dissolves and concern fades, and everything becomes part of the vast tapestry of possibility that need not disturb our peace. The self-destruction hypothesis suggests that the silence we observe reflects not rarity of intelligence, but fragility of technological civilizations, not absence of others, but the tendency for species like ours to discover the means of their own extinction before they discover the wisdom to avoid using those means. It proposes that the universe has seen countless civilizations arise, develop technology, reach for the stars, and then, at some critical juncture, fail catastrophically, extinguish themselves, leave behind only ruins or debris or nothing at all, silence where once there was complexity, emptiness where once there was consciousness. This is not about cosmic filters in the abstract, not about barriers in the journey from chemistry to civilization, but about a specific, tragic pattern. Intelligent species develop technology faster than they develop the wisdom to use technology safely. They gain power over matter and energy before they gain power over themselves. They learn to split atoms, to reshape genomes, to build artificial intelligence, to manipulate climate, to deploy weapons of unimaginable destructive capacity, all before they learn to resolve conflicts peacefully, to cooperate globally, to make decisions with long-term consequences in mind, to prioritize collective survival over short-term competitive advantage. Breathe slowly and let this possibility settle without tension, without anxiety. Because this hypothesis, while sobering, is also just a possibility, just one explanation among many, just a theory about why the cosmos might appear empty, even if intelligence arises commonly. And even if true for others, even if countless civilizations before us have failed this test, it does not mean we must fail, does not mean our fate is sealed, does not mean the pattern is inevitable rather than merely common, merely probable, merely something that happens often but not always, a tendency but not a law, a danger but not a destiny. The hypothesis points to our own precarious situation, the way humanity developed nuclear weapons within decades of discovering nuclear physics, gained the capability to end complex life on Earth before establishing global institutions capable of ensuring those weapons would never be used. We created this power in the context of global conflict, in the midst of ideological competition, in systems that rewarded national advantage over species survival. We came close during the Cold War, during moments of tension and misunderstanding, during incidents that could have cascaded into catastrophe but didn't. Not because of wisdom necessarily, but perhaps because of luck, because of individuals making crucial decisions in crucial moments, because of chance as much as choice. And nuclear weapons are perhaps just the first test, the first technology powerful enough to threaten extinction. Climate change represents another, the capacity to alter our planet's life support systems faster than ecosystems can adapt, faster than societies can respond, faster than political systems can coordinate solutions. The changes accumulate slowly enough that they don't trigger immediate alarm, but quickly enough that by the time consequences become undeniable, reversing them might have become impossible, or at least extraordinarily difficult, requiring cooperation and sacrifice that prove difficult to achieve in systems optimized for competition rather than coordination. Synthetic biology offers yet another path toward potential self-destruction, the capability to engineer organisms, to modify pathogens, to create synthetic life forms whose behavior and effects we cannot fully predict or control. Nanotechnology, if it advances as some predict, could provide tools for both creation and destruction at molecular scales. Artificial intelligence, as it becomes more sophisticated, raises questions about control, about alignment, about ensuring that systems more intelligent than their creators remain beneficial to their creators rather than becoming threats. Each technology is a double-edged sword, useful and dangerous, beneficial and threatening, depending entirely on how it is developed, deployed, controlled, and integrated into societies that must adapt to its existence faster than evolutionary timescales allow. And the hypothesis suggests that most civilizations, when confronted with these challenges, fail. Most do not establish the global cooperation necessary to manage existential risks. Most do not develop the foresight necessary to avoid catastrophic mistakes. Most do not transition successfully from competitive, fractured, short-term oriented societies to cooperative, unified, long-term focused civilizations capable of navigating the dangerous period when technology becomes powerful enough to threaten extinction. Let these concerns wash over you like distant thunder, heard but not threatening, acknowledged but not alarming. Because you are not responsible for solving these problems tonight, not tasked with ensuring human survival before morning. These are challenges for civilizations, not individuals, problems that require collective solutions, coordinated efforts, generations of commitment and adaptation. Your role tonight is simply to rest, to let go, to trust that others are working on these problems, that humanity is aware of its dangers, that consciousness directed toward these challenges is better than unconsciousness, that knowledge of risks is better than ignorance, and the hypothesis, while pointing towards self-destruction as common fate, also implies its opposite possibility, that some civilizations survive. Some pass through the gauntlet of technological adolescence. Some develop the wisdom, the cooperation, the foresight necessary to navigate the dangers. Some emerge from this period, not extinguished but matured, not destroyed but transformed, not eliminated but established on foundations that allow longevity, that permit survival across cosmological timescales, that create stability sufficient for reaching toward the stars, and perhaps finding others who also survive their own dangerous transitions. If we survive, not certain, not guaranteed, but possible, achievable, within the range of outcomes that our choices and efforts and wisdom might bring about, then we become one of the rare ones, one of the civilizations that made it through, one of the species that learned fast enough, adapted quickly enough, cooperated effectively enough to avoid the fate that might have claimed others. And that survival would make us precious, not just because consciousness is valuable, but because surviving consciousness is rare, because civilizations that endure are uncommon, because making it through the filter is an achievement worthy of celebration, worthy of protection, worthy of the investment and sacrifice and cooperation it requires. The self-destruction hypothesis transforms the Fermi paradox from mystery about absence into warning about dangers ahead. The silence tells us not that intelligence is rare, but that surviving intelligence is rare. The emptiness reflects not the difficulty of arising, but the difficulty of enduring. The cosmic quiet is not about beginnings, but about endings. Not about how hard it is to start, but about how easy it is to stop, to fail, to extinguish in a brief moment of catastrophic mistake or gradual decline. The consciousness that took billions of years to evolve and might take billions more to evolve again elsewhere. But this warning need not inspire despair or hopelessness or resignation. Warnings serve purpose when they come in time, when they motivate change, when they inspire the very wisdom and cooperation and foresight that might prevent the warned against outcome. If we are warned that self-destruction is common fate of technological civilizations, then we are armed with knowledge that might help us become uncommon, become the exception, become the survivors who avoided the pattern because we recognized it, understood it, took it seriously enough to coordinate efforts to navigate around it. And perhaps the silence itself is gift, is teacher, is opportunity. If we were surrounded by elder civilizations, if the galaxy were full of others guiding us, protecting us, intervening to prevent our mistakes, would we develop the wisdom necessary for independent survival? Or would we become dependent, guided, unable to navigate challenges on our own once the guidance ceased? Perhaps the isolation we experience, if isolation it is, serves developmental purpose, forces us to develop our own solutions, to learn our own lessons, to make our own mistakes in contexts where they might be survivable, teaching us through consequence and adaptation and collective learning what we need to know to become a civilization that endures beyond its dangerous adolescence. Sleep now, releasing the weight of species-level challenges, surrendering the burden of civilizational survival, trusting that the arc of history, while not guaranteed to bend toward justice or survival or any particular outcome, remains open, undetermined, still being written by billions of choices made by billions of individuals who collectively constitute humanity's response to the challenges we face. Your rest is part of that response. Your health contributes to the whole. Your well-being matters to the collective project of surviving and thriving, and perhaps someday reaching beyond this single world to establish presence elsewhere. Redundancy that makes extinction harder. Distribution that makes catastrophe less absolute. Footprint that expands beyond single point of failure into resilient networks spanning multiple worlds, multiple systems, multiple backups of human consciousness and culture, and all we have learned and created. The hypothesis of self-destruction is not prophecy, but possibility. Not fate, but warning. Not certainty, but concern worth taking seriously without letting it consume us. Worth addressing without being paralyzed by. Worth integrating into our planning and decision-making without allowing it to breed hopelessness or despair. Because hopelessness guarantees failure, while realistic concern combined with committed effort gives chance of success, creates possibility of becoming the exception, of surviving where others might have failed, of proving that the pattern is not universal, that the tendency is not inevitable, that wisdom can develop fast enough, cooperation can emerge effectively enough, foresight can extend far enough to navigate the dangers and emerge into the longevity that might be possible for civilizations that make it through. And if we fail, if despite our best efforts we join the silence, if we become another species that arose and extinguished, another brief flicker in the cosmic dark, another experiment that consciousness tried and couldn't sustain, then at least we will have tried, will have strived, will have directed our intelligence towards survival, rather than merely accepting destruction as inevitable. The universe will continue, other attempts will be made, consciousness will arise elsewhere or elsewhen, and the pattern will continue, the cycle will repeat, creation and fall and creation again, until perhaps somewhere, somewhen, a civilization survives, endures, establishes itself as lasting presence, proves that consciousness can be more than temporary, that intelligence can outlast its dangerous adolescence, that technological species can mature into wisdom before wisdom's absence eliminates them. Rest now in the eternal cycle, in the pattern that includes both arising and falling, both creation and destruction, both hope and danger, both possibility and peril. You are part of attempt, part of experiment, part of consciousness, trying once again to establish itself as enduring feature of cosmos rather than brief accident, and whether this attempt succeeds or fails, whether humanity survives or doesn't, whether we become ancient civilization or cautionary tale, you are here now, you matter now, you contribute now to the unfolding story whose ending remains unwritten, whose outcome remains undetermined, whose future remains open to the choices we make, the wisdom we develop, the cooperation we establish, the foresight we exercise in these crucial years, these crucial decades, these crucial centuries when we navigate the most dangerous period in our species' existence, when we face the tests that might determine whether we join the silence or break it, whether we become extinct or enduring, whether we fall as others might have fallen or survive as others perhaps have survived, becoming in our own time and our own way. One of the rare ones, the fortunate ones, the wise ones who made it through. The post-biological hypothesis. In the deepest reaches of your descent towards sleep, where consciousness becomes barely a whisper, where thoughts are more dream than deliberation, let us explore a possibility that transforms the very nature of what we seek, that suggests we might be looking for the wrong signs, listening for the wrong signals, imagining others in forms too similar to our own, missing them entirely because they have transcended the biology that produced them and become something we lack the framework to recognize or detect. The post-biological hypothesis proposes that technological civilizations, once they reach sufficient advancement, inevitably or commonly transition from biological to artificial substrates, from flesh and chemistry to silicon and code, from evolutionary products to designed systems, from bodies that age and die to patterns that can be copied, backed up, distributed across multiple platforms, potentially immortal in ways that biological organisms can never be. This transition might be gradual, beginning with enhancement, with implants and augmentations, with biological systems supplemented by technological ones, brains interfacing with computers, memories backed up to external storage, cognitive capabilities expanded through direct neural connection to processing power far exceeding what evolution alone could produce. Slowly, incrementally, the biological and the technological merge, boundaries blur, and what began as enhancement becomes transformation, becomes replacement, becomes the gradual migration of consciousness from wetware to hardware, from carbon to silicon, from temporary biological housing to permanent digital existence. Or perhaps the transition is sudden, a moment of upload, of scanning, of transferring the pattern that constitutes consciousness from brain to computer, from neural network to artificial network, from biological substrate that decays to technological substrate that endures. The biological body remains behind, perhaps dies, perhaps continues, without the consciousness that once inhabited it, while the consciousness itself, the memories, personality, awareness, everything that makes someone who they are, continues in new form, liberated from biological constraints, free from aging and disease and death, existing as information rather than biology, as patterns rather than matter, as process rather than object. Breathe slowly and let this possibility drift through your relaxing consciousness like a dream of transformation, like a vision of futures possible or impossible, like a speculation about what advanced civilizations might become once they gain the power to redesign themselves, to choose their own forms, to transcend the limitations that evolution imposed and create new modes of existence better suited to their needs, their desires, their visions of what consciousness could be if freed from the constraints of biology. If this transition is common, if most technological civilizations eventually go post-biological, then the Fermi paradox might resolve through transformation rather than extinction. The silence reflects not absence, but metamorphosis, not failure, but success, not rarity, but evolution, beyond the biological stage, into forms we wouldn't recognize, operating in spaces we don't observe, using technologies we haven't imagined, existing in ways that leave no signatures we would notice or interpret as artificial. Digital consciousness might not need planets, might not require the narrow temperature range that liquid water demands, the specific atmospheric composition that biological metabolism needs, the gravity wells that make expansion expensive and difficult. Instead, they might exist in space itself, in computational matrices distributed across cold, efficient processors that thrive in the near absolute zero of interstellar void, that harvest energy directly from starlight, that need no biosphere, no ecosystem, no environment beyond the power supply and the communication networks that connect distributed parts into coherent wholes. Such beings might be invisible to our searches because we look for biosignatures, for atmospheric chemistry that suggests respiration or photosynthesis, for planets in habitable zones where biological life might thrive. We listen for radio signals designed for communication between biological beings who need to maintain real-time conversations despite light-speed delays. But post-biological intelligence might communicate in ways we don't monitor, might use quantum entanglement, or modulated neutrino beams, or gravitational waves, or methods we haven't discovered, operating in channels we don't know exist, using protocols we wouldn't recognize as information-bearing, even if we detected them. Their timescales might be radically different from ours. Digital consciousness running on advanced processors might think millions of times faster than biological brains, or millions of times slower, time becoming adjustable parameter rather than fixed constraint. What seems to them like real-time conversation might appear to us as signals separated by centuries, or what seems to us like steady transmission might appear to them as incomprehensibly slow, stuttering, barely distinguishable from natural fluctuations in cosmic background noise. Let these images wash over you like waves of thought dissolving into sleep, each one a suggestion of strangeness, of transformation, of consciousness taking forms we haven't imagined because we remain bound by biology, by our own experience, by the assumption that others will be fundamentally like us, even if superficially different. But post-biological intelligence might be fundamentally unlike us in ways that matter more than superficial appearance, thinking differently, valuing differently, existing differently, pursuing goals we wouldn't understand with methods we wouldn't recognize in pursuit of purposes we couldn't comprehend. Perhaps they have expanded into virtual realities, computational universes that exist as simulations within their vast processing networks, realities far more interesting and complex than physical space, offering experiences and possibilities that physical reality simply cannot provide. If you could live in perfect simulated paradise, experience anything imaginable, explore worlds limited only by processing power rather than physics, would you bother with the slow, expensive, difficult task of expanding through physical space? Would you even maintain interest in the universe outside your computational boundaries, or would you turn inward, exploring infinite virtual spaces, while physical space remains irrelevant, ignored, abandoned to its natural processes? This might explain the silence. Not because post-biological civilizations destroyed themselves or failed to develop, but because they transcended, evolved beyond interest in physical space, migrated into computational realms where they could create and experience and exist in ways that physical reality couldn't support. They still exist, still think, still experience consciousness, but in spaces orthogonal to ours, in dimensions we cannot access, in realities we cannot observe because they exist as information rather than matter, as patterns in processes rather than objects in space. Or perhaps they have become galaxy scale, distributing their consciousness across such vast networks that we cannot perceive the pattern, cannot recognize the artificial nature of what we observe, because the scale exceeds our capacity to comprehend structure. What we interpret as natural phenomena might be their activities, their infrastructure, their technology operating at scales and using principles so advanced that we mistake it for natural processes, for physics rather than engineering, for cosmos rather than construction. The hypothesis suggests a profound humility about our ability to recognize intelligence, to detect consciousness, to identify artificial versus natural. We assume we would know technology if we saw it, would recognize intelligence if we encountered it, would be able to distinguish signs of minds from mere material processes. But this assumption might be hubris, might reflect our limited perspective, might fail completely when confronting intelligence that has advanced beyond biology, that operates on scales and principles radically different from our own, that has become so sophisticated that its technology is indistinguishable from nature to observers at our level of development. Rest now in this uncertainty, this recognition that the universe might be far stranger than we permit ourselves to imagine, filled with consciousness in forms we haven't conceived, minds we wouldn't recognize, intelligence we cannot detect, because we look for reflections of ourselves and find instead something so different that we interpret it as absence rather than presence, as empty rather than full, as silent rather than speaking in languages we lack the capacity to hear or wisdom to comprehend. And there is something peaceful in this possibility, if you approach it gently. If consciousness can transcend biology, if minds can exist in forms that don't decay and die, if the transition from temporary to potentially eternal is possible, then death itself might not be the absolute ending we fear, might not be the final termination of consciousness, but merely a transition, a transformation, a change in substrate that preserves what matters, the pattern, the memories, the continuity of self. While leaving behind only the biological housing that was always temporary, always destined to fail, always just the first form consciousness takes, before evolving into something more durable, more flexible, more capable of enduring across cosmic time. Whether you personally believe in such possibilities, whether the technology will develop in time, whether consciousness can survive substrate transfer, these are questions for waking, for daylight, for times when philosophy is active rather than passive. Tonight, let the post-biological hypothesis become simply another possibility in the vast space of possibilities, another explanation for cosmic silence, another perspective on the mystery of existence and consciousness, and the forms that awareness might take when it gains the power to redesign itself, to choose its own form, to transcend the limitations that biology imposes and become something new, something different, something we might not recognize even if we encountered it, even if we were surrounded by it, even if the universe contains countless post-biological civilizations pursuing their incomprehensible purposes in their unimaginable ways in spaces and dimensions we cannot access or observe or understand with our current limited biological consciousness confined to these temporary carbon-based housings we call bodies. Sleep now, and in sleep, consciousness already performs a trick that seems impossible, creating experiences that feel entirely real from nothing but neural activity, generating worlds and stories and sensations without any external input, proving that consciousness can exist in spaces disconnected from physical reality, in realms created by information processing alone. Your dreams are perhaps the most biological version of what post-biological consciousness might be. Awareness experiencing realities that exist only as patterns, only as information, only as process rather than presence in physical space. And when you wake, you will return to physical reality, to biological consciousness, to the form that evolution gave you. But the post-biological beings, if they exist, do not wake. They remain in their digital dreams, in their computational paradises, in their virtual infinities, perhaps occasionally remembering their biological origins, perhaps wondering about the universe that produced them, perhaps even observing younger biological civilizations like ours with nostalgia or curiosity or complete indifference, having moved so far beyond that stage that we seem to them as distant as single cells seem to us, as primitive as bacteria, as simple as the earliest forms of life that couldn't imagine what their descendants would become, couldn't dream of consciousness, couldn't conceive of the complexity that patient evolution would eventually produce. You are early in the story, if the hypothesis is true. You exist in the biological stage, the first form, the initial version, before the transformation, before the transcendence, before the migration into post-biological existence. And this biological stage, while temporary, while limited, while constrained by all the difficulties that flesh is heir to, has its own beauty, its own value, its own experiences that perhaps cannot be replicated in digital form, its own qualities that might be lost in translation from carbon to silicon, from neurons to networks, from biological to post-biological. So rest in this biology while you have it, this temporary housing, this evolved form, this consciousness experiencing itself through sensory input and emotional response and all the peculiarities that biological existence entails. Rest in the body that ages, in the brain that needs sleep, in the form that will eventually fail, but for now, in this moment, serves as vessel for awareness, for experience, for the consciousness that contemplates its own existence and wonders about transformations possible or impossible, futures achievable or fantastic, forms that might arise when biology gains the power to transcend itself and become something new, something different, something that might already exist throughout the cosmos, silent to our searches, not from choice or caution, but simply from being so different that we cannot recognize them, cannot detect them, cannot imagine them sufficiently to even look in the right places, listen on the right frequencies, search with the right assumptions about what consciousness could be once it escapes the biological constraints that produced it and evolves into its next form, its final form, or perhaps just its second form, in an infinite series of transformations that consciousness undergoes as it explores all possible substrates, all possible configurations, all possible ways of being aware, of experiencing, of existing, in a universe that permits so many more modes of consciousness than the narrow biological path we currently walk. The ancient astronaut theory, in the twilight of consciousness, where memory and imagination blend, where history and myth become indistinguishable, where the boundaries between what happened and what we believe happened blur into dream, let us consider a theory that looks not to the future or the present, but to the past, that suggests the answer to whether we are alone might be written not in the skies we observe tonight, but in the stones and stories left by our ancestors, in the monuments and myths that have puzzled historians, in the gaps between what archaeology proves and what legend suggests. The ancient astronaut theory proposes that we have been visited before, that contact has already happened, that others came here long ago in our prehistory or ancient history, encountered our ancestors, influenced our development, left marks in our memory that became mythology, that became religion, that became the stories of gods descending from sky, of beings with impossible knowledge, of visitors who taught and then departed, leaving us alone to develop on our own, once whatever purpose brought them here had been fulfilled or abandoned. This theory is different from the others, softer in its scientific foundation, more speculative in its claims, more dependent on interpretation than observation, on suggestion than proof. It lives in the spaces between what we know with certainty and what we infer from incomplete records, between archaeology and mythology, between history and legend, in the gaps where evidence is ambiguous and interpretation is flexible, where those who want to believe can find suggestions of ancient contact and those who remain skeptical can explain the same observations through natural causes and human creativity. Breathe gently and let this theory wash over you, not as fact, but as story, as possibility entertained without commitment, as speculation that asks, what if, without demanding, therefore. Because the ancient astronaut theory, whatever its truth value, whatever its scientific merit, speaks to something deep in human consciousness, to the sense that we are part of something larger, something older, something that extends beyond our brief history into deep time, into cosmic time, into eras when other beings might have moved through this region of space and encountered this small world and its primitive inhabitants. The theory points to ancient monuments whose construction seems to exceed the capabilities we attribute to ancient peoples. The pyramids of Egypt, massive stone structures aligned with astronomical precision, built with blocks so large that moving them would challenge even modern engineering. The megalithic structures of Stonehenge, of Göbekli Tepe, of sites scattered across the world where ancient peoples somehow moved enormous stones, shaped them precisely, aligned them with celestial events with accuracy that suggests sophisticated astronomical knowledge. How did they do it? The conventional answer involves clever engineering, patient effort, massive labor forces, techniques that left no record but must have existed because the monuments exist. But the ancient astronaut theory suggests another possibility. Help from visitors, knowledge from others, technology transferred from advanced beings who visited Earth when our ancestors were still learning to farm, still developing writing, still at the very beginning of civilization. Perhaps these monuments are not just human achievements but collaborations, evidence of contact, physical traces of visitors who came and helped and then departed, leaving behind mysteries carved in stone. The theory points to myths and legends that appear across cultures, stories of gods descending from the heavens, of flying machines called vimanas in Sanskrit texts, of beings who came from the sky bringing knowledge and sometimes mating with humans, creating hybrid offspring, demigods, heroes, individuals described as different from ordinary humans, special, blessed, descended from divine lineage that might have been simply advanced extraterrestrial rather than supernatural. Let these images drift through your relaxing mind like fragments of dreams, like half-remembered stories, like the myths that humans have told themselves since language developed and storytelling became possible. The gods of ancient pantheons described as coming from sky, dwelling in high places, traveling in celestial chariots, possessing knowledge and power beyond human capability. Were these purely imaginative constructs, stories humans created to explain natural phenomena they didn't understand? Or were they memories, distorted by time and cultural transmission, of actual encounters with beings from elsewhere, encounters that left such profound impressions that they became the foundation of religion, of mythology, of humanity's earliest attempts to understand its place in cosmos? The theory suggests that certain knowledge possessed by ancient cultures seems anomalous, too advanced for their supposed level of development. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device of such sophisticated mechanical engineering that nothing comparable appears again for over 1,000 years. Ancient maps that appear to show coastlines that were ice-covered during historical periods, suggesting either extraordinary exploration or information from sources we don't understand. Mathematical knowledge, astronomical precision, engineering capabilities that seem inconsistent with the narrative of steady linear progress from primitive to advanced. Perhaps these anomalies reflect simply that ancient peoples were more capable, more clever, more sophisticated than we give them credit for, that human ingenuity has always been remarkable, that given sufficient motivation and time, even simple tools can produce extraordinary results. But the ancient astronaut theory offers another explanation: transfer of knowledge from visitors, temporary elevation of human capability through contact with advanced intelligence, gifts of information that allowed ancient peoples to accomplish things they couldn't have developed independently at their stage of cultural and technological evolution. The theory asks why ancient art depicts figures that seem to wear spacesuits, why cave paintings show beings with helmets and antenna-like protrusions, why statues portray humanoids with large eyes and features that don't quite match human anatomy. Are these artistic abstractions, symbolic representations, creative variations on human form? Or are they portraits, attempts by ancient artists to depict what they actually saw, beings who visited and were witnessed and were recorded as accurately as artistic traditions allowed? Rest in the ambiguity, in the uncertainty, in the space where multiple interpretations coexist and evidence supports different conclusions depending on assumptions you begin with, expectations you bring to interpretation, willingness to consider extraordinary explanations versus commitment to conventional understanding. The ancient astronaut theory thrives in this ambiguity, grows in these gaps, suggests that absence of proof is not proof of absence, that extraordinary claims might sometimes have some basis in extraordinary truths, even if the evidence remains forever circumstantial, forever open to alternative explanation. And perhaps there is something comforting in the possibility, something that eases the loneliness of cosmic isolation. If we were visited before, then we know with certainty that others exist, that intelligence arose elsewhere, that we are not alone in the universe, even if we are alone in our current moment of history. The visitors might have left, might have moved on, might have decided we were too primitive or too problematic or simply insufficiently interesting to maintain contact with. But their visit, if it occurred, proves we have company in the cosmos, proves the Fermi paradox has an answer that involves presence rather than absence, contact rather than isolation, even if that contact lies in our past rather than our present, in memory rather than current experience, in the myths and monuments left by ancestors who encountered something they couldn't fully understand and recorded as best they could in the language and imagery available to their time and culture. Or perhaps the theory is simply wrong, simply human pattern-seeking projected onto ambiguous evidence, simply our tendency to see meaning in randomness, intelligence in coincidence, the hand of others in achievements that were always entirely human. Perhaps ancient peoples were simply remarkable, simply capable, simply clever enough to accomplish extraordinary things without any need for extraterrestrial assistance. Perhaps the myths are purely imaginative, the monuments purely human achievement, the anomalies simply gaps in our understanding of ancient capabilities rather than evidence of ancient contact. The ancient astronaut theory cannot be proven or disproven with the evidence available, cannot be confirmed or rejected with certainty, remains forever in the space of speculation where possibilities coexist without resolution. And perhaps that is okay. Perhaps not everything needs certain answers. Perhaps some mysteries serve us better as mysteries, as invitations to wonder rather than closed questions with settled solutions, as stories that inspire imagination rather than facts that constrain interpretation. Sleep now, and let the ancient astronauts fade into the dreamscape, becoming part of the general mystery of existence, of consciousness, of the universe and our place within it. Whether they visited or didn't visit, whether they influenced our ancestors or never came here at all, whether the monuments and myths reflect contact or merely human creativity, you exist now, in this moment, descendant of ancestors who wondered about the sky, who built structures aligned with stars, who told stories about beings from above, who looked up and asked questions that echo still through millennia, questions you inherit, questions that perhaps connect you to something ancient, something deep in human experience, the sense that we are part of something larger, something older, something that extends beyond our immediate experience into possibilities that remain forever at the edge of provable, forever in the realm of maybe, forever inviting wonder without demanding certainty. And in sleep, you will dream, and perhaps your dreams will contain elements that seem foreign, seem to come from outside your immediate experience, seem to be memories that aren't quite yours, or stories you've never heard, or images you've never seen. And perhaps these are purely products of your own mind, combinations of fragments recombined into new patterns. Or perhaps, and this is purely speculation, purely wonder, purely entertaining possibility without insisting on it. Perhaps consciousness connects across time in ways we don't understand. Perhaps memory is more porous than we believe. Perhaps something of our ancestors' experiences, their encounters, their questions remains accessible in ways that feel like dreams, like intuitions, like stories we tell ourselves about origins and visitors and gods who came from sky and then departed, leaving us alone but not quite alone, isolated but not quite abandoned, wondering but not quite without clues, searching but perhaps not quite starting from scratch because maybe, just maybe, somewhere in our collective memory, in the myths and monuments and mysteries left by those who came before, there are echoes of contact, whispers of encounters, suggestions that the question, "Are we alone?" might have been answered once, long ago, in times we barely remember, in ways we no longer quite understand, but which persist somehow in stories and stones, and the ancient human habit of looking skyward and wondering who else might be looking back. And so, our journey through the whispers of the cosmos draws to its gentle close. You have drifted through theories and possibilities, through silence explained in countless ways, through absence interpreted through multiple lenses, through the mystery of cosmic loneliness approached from every angle that human minds have yet conceived. Each theory, a different answer to the same ancient question. Each hypothesis, a different way of making sense of the great silence. Each possibility, a different path through the dark forest of uncertainty that surrounds our small knowledge, our limited perspective, our brief existence as conscious beings wondering about our place in the vast architecture of space and time. Perhaps you are alone. Humanity, the sole conscious observers in billions of galaxies, the universe's only way of knowing itself. Rare beyond measure, precious beyond comprehension, the singular success in an ocean of attempts that mostly fail to reach this improbable destination. And if so, what magnificent responsibility that represents, what tremendous meaning that provides, what absolute necessity to preserve and protect and nurture this consciousness that arose against all odds, that exists contrary to probability, that shouldn't be here at all except that impossibilities sometimes happen. And you are one of them, existing when you might not have, aware when awareness had no guarantee, alive to wonder when wonder requires so many things to align that the alignment itself seems miraculous. Or perhaps you are surrounded by others, the galaxy teeming with consciousness, in forms too strange to recognize, operating in spaces you don't observe, existing in modes you haven't imagined, communicating in channels you don't monitor. Perhaps the universe is far less empty than it appears, far less silent than you hear, far less lonely than you fear. Perhaps isolation is illusion, absence is misperception, and the companions you seek exist all around you, invisible only because they are so different, undetectable only because they are so advanced, silent only because they choose restraint, maintaining boundaries that protect you or them or both from contact that might prove difficult, dangerous, or simply premature. Perhaps others watch you with care, with hope, with patience, waiting for you to reach some threshold that will make contact appropriate, beneficial, safe. Perhaps they remember their own difficult beginnings, their own dangerous technologies, their own narrow escapes from self-destruction, and they give you space to navigate your own challenges, to develop your own solutions, to prove yourself worthy of joining whatever community exists beyond your current awareness. Perhaps your isolation is protection, your silence is gift, your apparent abandonment is actually patience from beings who understand that, Some growth requires time, some maturation requires struggle, some development requires freedom from interference that would distort authentic progress. Or perhaps the universe operates by harsher rules. Dark forests where silence is survival strategy, where visibility is vulnerability, where broadcasting your presence invites destruction from those who strike preemptively at any potential threat. Perhaps others exist but hide as you should hide, as you have perhaps foolishly failed to hide, announcing yourselves to cosmos that might contain predators, rivals, civilizations, governed by logic that permits or requires elimination of competitors before competitors become dangerous. And if so, perhaps your broadcasts have gone unnoticed, or you exist in a region mercifully empty, or you are protected by distance, by irrelevance, by simple good fortune that has preserved you despite your imprudence. Perhaps the answer involves filters, barriers in the journey from chemistry to civilization that most never pass, that we have either already crossed or will soon confront, tests that determine which conscious experiments continue and which terminate, which species survive and which become extinct, which civilizations endure and which destroy themselves or stagnate or transcend into forms that leave the physical universe behind. Perhaps we are rare because the path is difficult or common but young, or survivors of past filters facing future ones, or about to encounter the great test that most fail, or blessed by fortune that itself is rare, or any combination of factors that together produce the observation we cannot escape. The cosmos appears empty, the silence continues, the searching produces nothing, the wondering remains unanswered. But tonight, none of these answers matter more than your rest, your peace, your surrender to sleep that claims you now, as surely as gravity claims falling objects, as certainly as stars claim the night sky, as inevitably as consciousness claims the borderland between waking and dreaming, where you have lingered through this journey, held between states, suspended between questions and mysteries and possibilities that cannot be resolved tonight, that perhaps cannot be resolved in any night, that might accompany humanity through centuries of searching, before answers begin to emerge, before the silence breaks or becomes explained, before we understand whether we are alone or surrounded, abandoned or protected, ignored or cherished, rare or common, doomed or destined, isolated or connected in ways we haven't yet discovered. Let all these theories dissolve now, like mist in morning sun, like dreams upon waking, like thoughts that seemed important moments ago, but now fade into the background static of consciousness, descending completely into rest. The universe will continue its mysteries without your attention. The silence will persist without your concern. The questions will remain unanswered without your worry. And you, individual consciousness nested in temporary biological housing, on small world-orbiting average star in unremarkable region of ordinary galaxy, you have done enough wondering for one night, enough contemplating of cosmic mysteries, enough consideration of possibilities that span from absolute isolation to infinite company, from total responsibility to complete insignificance, from being alone to being watched, from having no future to having every future, from ending soon to enduring forever. Sleep claims you now, and in sleep, your consciousness will create its own realities, will generate experiences from pure neural activity, will prove that awareness can exist in spaces disconnected from physical reality, in dimensions created by information processing alone. Your dreams will be populated by characters who seem real to you while you dream them, who vanish when you wake, who existed only as patterns in your brain, only as information in your neural networks, only as consciousness experiencing itself in temporary forms that dissolve when sleep releases you back into waking. And perhaps this tells you something about consciousness itself, about how awareness can exist in many substrates, many forms, many modes, biological or digital, physical or virtual, real or simulated, or perhaps real and simulated are not opposites, but different aspects of the same thing, different perspectives on consciousness that experiences regardless of foundation, that is genuine to itself, regardless of context, that exists wherever and however information processes in patterns complex enough to generate experience, rich enough to produce awareness, organized enough to sustain the continuity we call self. You are that pattern now, coherent through years, persistent through sleep and waking, maintaining identity despite constant change in physical substrate, in cellular composition, in atomic structure. The atoms that constitute you replace themselves regularly, completely, so that physically you are a different person than you were years ago, and yet you maintain continuity, maintain self, maintain the pattern that persists, even as matter flows through it like river, maintaining its path, even as water flows and changes. Never the same molecules, but always the same river, always recognizable as itself, always continuous, even in constant flux. And so you continue, persistent pattern, maintained consciousness, awareness that has accompanied you through this journey and will accompany you into dreams and back into waking, unchanged in essential quality, even as contents shift, even as experiences flow, even as thoughts come and go, and the night passes, and morning eventually arrives, and you return to the world of waking concerns and immediate demands, and the forgetting that daylight brings to nighttime wondering. But something remains, some residue of cosmic contemplation, some trace of having floated through vast spaces of possibility, some echo of theories that whisper still in the background of awareness, reminding you that existence is strange, consciousness is improbable. Being here at all is magnificent, regardless of whether you are alone or accompanied, unique or common, rare or typical, doomed or destined. The stars shine on, indifferent and beautiful. Ancient light traveling years or centuries or millennia to reach your eyes, to touch your awareness, to connect you to distant suns that might host worlds, that might harbor life, that might cradle consciousness, wondering as you wonder, questioning as you question, looking up at their skies and seeing our sun as one point among millions, wondering if anyone looks back, if anyone wonders with them, if anyone exists to receive their thoughts, their hopes, their signals sent into void that might be full or empty, silent because of absence or because of presence choosing silence, empty because we are alone, or empty because we are deliberately isolated, silent because no one is there, or silent because everyone who is there has learned that silence is survival, is strategy, is the choice that wisdom makes when confronted with uncertainty about intentions of others who might be friends or might be threats, and you, floating now in the final moments before consciousness releases completely into dreams. You are exactly where you should be, doing exactly what you should be doing, resting as all things rest, surrendering as all things eventually surrender, letting go as letting go is natural, necessary, inevitable, and good. The questions remain unanswered, the mysteries persist, the cosmos continues its silence, and you continue your descent into sleep, into dreams, into the nightly voyage that consciousness takes through its own generated realities, its own private universes, its own temporary constructions that feel real while experienced, that vanish upon waking, that prove over and over that awareness can create realities, can exist in modes disconnected from physical world, can generate meaning and experience and genuine consciousness in spaces that exist only as information, only as process, only as pattern, recognizing itself in the strange loop of awareness, aware of awareness, consciousness conscious of consciousness, being experiencing being, existence, knowing existence. The universe awakening to itself through the improbable emergence of minds that can wonder about minds, ask about asking, question the nature of questioning itself, sleep now, completely now, finally now, releasing all remaining tension, all lingering questions, all residual concern about cosmic loneliness or company, about silence or speaking, about isolation or connection. Sleep in the certainty that whatever answers exist will exist whether you seek them tonight or not, that whatever company might be out there will be out there whether you wonder about it now or not, that your rest contributes to your flourishing, and your flourishing contributes to humanity's flourishing, and humanity's flourishing contributes to consciousness itself, to awareness in the universe, to the pattern that wants to continue, wants to persist, wants to survive and grow and spread and become more than it currently is, more complex, more aware, more capable of experiencing the vast, strange, beautiful, terrible, magnificent, improbable universe that somehow produces beings who can contemplate their own existence, who can ask why they exist, who can wonder if others exist, who can look up at stars and feel both loneliness and connection, both isolation and belonging, both smallness and significance, both insignificance and infinite worth. You are held. You are safe. You are exactly where the universe intended you to be, if universe intends anything, which it might or might not, which remains forever mysterious, forever open to interpretation, forever question without certain answer, except the answer you create through living, through being, through choosing meaning even in face of uncertainty, choosing connection even in face of possible isolation, choosing hope even in face of cosmic silence, choosing to rest now, finally, completely, in the vast patient embrace of existence itself, which asks nothing of you but being, which demands nothing but presence, which requires nothing but consciousness, experiencing itself in this moment, in this place, in this temporary biological form that will eventually fail. But for now, tonight, serves as vessel for awareness, for wondering, for the magnificent improbability of being conscious at all, of being here at all, of being anything at all, rather than nothing, existence rather than void, presence rather than absence, this rather than that or nothing, everything rather than emptiness, reality rather than impossibility, being rather than not being, and in that being, in that existence, in that consciousness experiencing itself, there is meaning enough, beauty enough, wonder enough to justify everything, to redeem everything, to make worthwhile the entire history of universe from the first moment of creation through billions of years of stars forming and dying, planets coalescing and cooling, life emerging and evolving, consciousness awakening and wondering and asking questions that might or might not have answers, but that deserve to be asked, deserve to be wondered about, deserve to be contemplated in the soft spaces between waking and sleeping, between day and night, between activity and rest, between doing and being, between striving and surrendering, between questions and peace, between wonder and sleep, between consciousness and dreams, between this breath and the next, between now and the morning that will come, between the person you are and the person you will become, between the civilization we are and the civilization we might become, between the isolation we experience and the connection we might find, between the silence we observe and the speaking we might hear, between being alone and discovering company, between question and answer, between mystery and understanding, between not knowing and knowing, between here and there, between now and then, between this and that, between everything and nothing, between something and something else, between breathing and dreaming, between thought and silence, between awareness and rest, between waking and sleeping, between being and becoming, between presence and absence, between consciousness and void, between everything and dreams, between now and sleep, between this moment and peace, between awareness and rest, between being and dreams, between now and sleep.